Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto become legends unseen since Hashirama and Madara part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Orochimaru did not believe in wasting potential and he would always try to prevent it if at all possible. Nawaki's death was unfortunate, but his time as the boy sensei made it clear to Orochimaru that he realistically would have never amounted to much, especially in comparison to his older sister. On the other hand, losing Anko was far more irritating, but that was mostly out of his hands. She was going to betray him, and killing the only survivor of the cursed seal of heaven up to that point would have been a waste, so he simply wiped her memory of anything pertinent and went on his way. Over the years, he had become very good at judging a person's potential. He needed to in order to build a competent force around himself out of strays, castaways, and captives. He had seen great things in Kabuto, Kamimuro, Gurren, and even the rest of the Sound Four after they each won their death battles. He had even seen enough in Dosu, Zaku, and Kin to let them live out their usefulness until their disposability inevitably caught up with them. He even, begrudgingly, could admit that Jiraiya's dumbest little bitch of a protege, Minato Namikaze, was pouring with potential when he was a wet behind the ears little shit. Fuck him for stealing the Hokage position from him, nonetheless. All of that was to say that he knew a thing or two about casing someone's potential, so when he hunted down and beat the shit out of Team 7 in the Forest of Death, he was both impressed and extremely frustrated. The plan for the venture was simple. He would infiltrate Konoha, kill some genin and disguise himself as one of them to enter the Forest of Death, and then he'd attack Team 7 and hold Sasuke's feet to the fire to determine if he would be a worthy vessel. If he wasn't, he'd simply kill him, pilfer his Sharingan, make it look like Danzo did it, and then watch as Itachi buried Konoha in a fit of rage. Maybe he'd clone Sasuke and then take him as a vessel to kill Itachi with later, or maybe he wouldn't, but that didn't really matter because Sasuke proved to be everything that he had hoped the boy would be and more. However, that was part of what irritated him so thoroughly. Why in the hell was this boy still a genin? Why wasn't he plucked from his home after the massacre and trained into the ground? He was clearly beyond the average genin after only a few months as a shinobi, so imagine what he could have been had he been quietly inducted into the Anbu to capitalize on being the only naturally occurring Sharingan in the village. He had potential in spades, but Konoha was doing fuck all with it and it was as maddening as it was advantageous for him. So, naturally, marking Sasuke with the cursed seal of heaven was a no-brainer. If he survived, whispering sweet nothings of unleashing his true potential and granting him the power necessary to kill Itachi so that he eventually left the village in search of Orochimaru would be child's play. It was so simple, in fact, that the plan was to mark him, kill his teammates, and then leave. The problem was that nothing was ever so simple. It wasn't just Sasuke whose enormous potential was being squandered. Enter Naruto Uzumaki, the son of that thieving fucking bastard, Minato, and the previous Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, Kushina Uzumaki. He knew about the boy and he knew what he contained, but he didn't know if the boy could use the beast's power. All of the information that Orochimaru received about him painted the picture of a talentless failure with severe delusions of grandeur and no genuine relationships or bonds to speak of. It was quite humorous that a child who should have been hailed as royalty by his village was only seen as trash by that very village. Serves that pompous bastard right. Eat a dick, Minato. He had intended to allow his summons to simply put the boy out of his misery, but Naruto surprised him by surviving the encounter and coming to his team's aid. He surprised him again when he challenged him using the Kyuubi's chakra. Had the boy been able to tap into his tenant's power all along, he certainly would have to have been trained to harness this power right. Of course not, that would be giving Konoha too much credit. It was more likely that he had no idea of his status until the 11th hour, and then his former sensei fed the boy all sorts of half-truths and BS assurances to ensure his continued loyalty. Hiruzen Sarutobi was a delightfully evil piece of shit when he really wanted to be. In any event, Naruto Uzumaki provided far greater amusement than Orochimaru had been anticipating, and while his mechanics were piss-poor and any sort of style was non-existent, he displayed an interesting level of guile and a quick wit while attacking him, alongside strength of both body and will that couldn't be disregarded. He would certainly be an interesting specimen to watch develop in the future, but he had no use for him at the moment, especially with Akatsuki running around. Cutting off access to the fox with the 5-element seal did the trick in subduing him, and Orochimaru discarded the admittedly surprising child to continue his business with Sasuke. Then, the boy surprised him once again by maintaining consciousness after having the seal placed on him. He was obviously hindered, yet he still got back up and continued to try to fight and protect his team. His tenacity was admirable, and while not as talented as Sasuke, he certainly was nothing to scoff at like Orochimaru had initially believed, despite clearly not having anything in the way of significant training or guidance. He, too, was being wasted by this village. It was at this point where he was staring down unbridled resolve brimming within such disgustingly cerulean eyes that he made a decision. One could call it haphazard, and they may not have been entirely incorrect, but damn it, he refused to let obvious potential go to waste any longer, especially since Konoha would be reduced to rubble by the end of the month anyway. Naruto, doing his level best to fight through the exhaustion, snarled at him from his spot standing protectively in front of his still convulsing teammate and the pink one. I won't let you lay another hand on my tea. I know who killed your parents. That stopped whatever drivel he was about to spew in its tracks. It was also a lie. Orochimaru didn't know for sure who instigated the Kyuubi's escape from Kushina. He had a theory, and it was a rather interesting theory, but he had no way of proving it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Naruto didn't need to know that, though. What he quietly muttered. You know who my parents are? Orochimaru's smile was absolutely poisonous. Of course. Many people in this village do, in fact. They'll never tell you who they are, though. You're too much of a flight risk of their own creation. Orochimaru could see Naruto struggling to grasp any words to put together a response. But the old man said that he didn't know who they were. Orochimaru finished for him. That was a lie, but you already knew that, didn't you? The silence he received was telling. Even the pink one's confusion was bleeding through her fear for her and her teammates' lives. Allow me to ask you a question, Naruto, Orochimaru smoothly continued, hooking the boy once again. When were you told about what you contain? The silence persisted, but it was now accompanied by a flash of hurt and consternation. That only confirmed his suspicions that it was very recently. This was excellent. It's such a shame that you'll never be trusted with information about something as simple as who you even are, Orochimaru piled on. Who else knows? It was time for the dagger. The Hokage knows, the village elders know, and I'm sure your sensei knows. Even my former teammate has to know, he was named your godfather, after all. Orochimaru would forever be thankful for Jiraiya getting drunk out of joy and spilling that information to him after Minato and Kushina informed him. It seemed like such useless information at the time, but currently, it was anything but. Meanwhile, the turmoil storming through Naruto was plain to see. Watching the trust Naruto had in his home and the adults around him wither away in real time was glorious. The flicker of darkness in his tumultuous expression was even better, as that meant Orochimaru had something to exploit. When you're ready to know all about everything this village has been keeping from you, Orochimaru cooed before his neck extended and his head shot towards Naruto, biting him just as he had Sasuke, come find me. The guttural cry of pain ripped itself from Naruto's throat as he collapsed into a writhing heap. A thorny, spiral pattern manifested on the spot he was bitten, indicating Naruto's branding of the cursed seal of hell. It was an experimental project Orochimaru had been developing in the event that he saw fit to brand a Jinchuriki. He wasn't entirely sure what spurred his curiosity so heavily that day way back when, but in the name of science and a lot of alcohol, Orochimaru had set out to collect chakra samples from all 9 Biju. Some were samples that he had collected during previous encounters in past wars, such as cursed sand from the Ichibi, a petrified molten turd courtesy of the Yonbi, and some of the Gobi's fur. For others, such as some preserved embers from the Nibi, coral from the Sanbi, and slime from the Rakubi, well, he had to get a little creative. He was just lucky that he happened to stumble upon a piece of one of the horns of the Hachibi, as well as the fact that the Jinchuriki of the Nanabi was a social butterfly, looking to make friends with anyone and everyone. Convincing her to abandon the village that scorned her in favor of new friends elsewhere was child's play, as was kidnapping some random child at the fire temple who had collected leftover chakra residue from the Kyuubi attack for some reason. Once the samples were secured, he synthesized them alongside Jugo's DNA to create something that far outstripped those of the Sound 4 and likely even trumped the cursed seals of heaven and earth. The goal was to craft a seal that would trump the influence of the Biju locked within a Jinchuriki, as well as survive exposure to their noxious chakra. He suspected that the Kyuubi's chakra would have expunged Naruto of any other cursed seal had he tried to brand him with any of those, so this would have to do assuming he survived it. It was still experimental, after all. If he did, though, well, why have the chakra of just one Biju when you could have them all? Oh, it appeared that the boy had finally passed out. That was good, his screaming was becoming annoying. Monster, he heard the pink one say while quivering in an ocean of distress. What did you do to them? Orochimaru silently mulled over the thought of killing her there and then. His business in the forest was concluded, and he really ought to exit stage left before Hiruzen stormed the place once the bodies of the genin he murdered were discovered. However, something about her intrigued him. Her fear could be smelled all the way in Kiri, yet she stood above her teammates and stared him straight in the eye, as if she was ready to die to protect them further. It was foolish since if he really wanted to kill all 3 of them, he would have done so in seconds at the very beginning, and he could tell that she knew that very well, but there she remained. It was admirable, he had to admit. Perhaps she may not be a total waste. He was a man of science, and experimentation was fundamental in science. Perhaps she had potential. It couldn't hurt to find out. What I did was give them a gift, he replied. I gave them power, and if they're worthy, I'll give them the means to achieve what they desire most. She stammered, fear still pouring off of her with confusion beginning to bleed back into the pool. I don't understand. Of course, you don't. You're not special like they are. He smirked at her wince upon hearing that statement. He had clearly found an insecurity of hers to pounce on. It's obvious even to me that you're decidedly unremarkable, especially in comparison to your two teammates, he continued, and he could see the beginnings of tears welling up through the distress. However, it's also plain to see that you care very dearly about these two, and you'll undoubtedly be devastated when they finally abandon you. They won't abandon me. She had apparently found the strength within her to fire back at that. The waver in her voice told Orochimaru all he needed to know, though. Not even she fully believed that. He had no interest in entertaining delusion. Oh, trust me, Sasuke is single-minded in his quest for vengeance against his brother. Naruto, on the other hand, has likely never experienced genuine kindness from anyone that didn't at least somewhat possess ulterior motives. He's a Jinchuriki, after all. They never really have it all that good. The earlier confusion present in her expression grew even more. A Jinchuriki. The Biju container, he answered. Your blonde teammate possesses the Kyuubi because his father was an upstart little bitch that didn't deserve the title of Hokage over me. Orochimaru stopped himself before he could further slip into that familiar rant. Now was not the time. But the Yondaime destroyed the Kyuubi. She insisted, her fear slowly vanishing as the present situation grew less combative. And Santa Claus is real, Orochimaru scoffed. Really, what sort of nonsense were they teaching these little idiots nowadays? No, he did not destroy the Kyuubi. He merely sealed it away into his newborn son like the boy's mother before him, then he died. Like a bitch. You don't seem to be too fond of the Yondaime. Irrelevant. Naruto's loyalty to this village is hanging on by the withering hopes and dreams of an old, sentimental fool who doesn't want to admit to being even more ruthless than the people he has cast away. Once they find out about the cursed seal I placed on him, they'll do all the work in pushing him away from the village for me. These two will leave and come to me at some point. Whether or not you come along with them is up to you. Her expression grew a bit frantic, and he could tell that she was racking her brain for a response. She was becoming desperate. I'll tell the Hokage. I'll spill everything. Orochimaru hummed, making a show of carefully considering her declaration. I suppose you could do that, but that would only alienate them from you even further. It would make it very clear to them that if it ever came down to them and the village, you choose the village 10 times out of 10. Why would they even consider taking you with them when they leave when you've proven that you can't be trusted? She was silent once again, her expression becoming so deliciously crestfallen when the reality of the situation finally crashed down upon her. He had either just successfully driven a massive wedge in this team or just facilitated an unshakable bond between them. Only time would tell, really. Then, he sensed a familiar chakra signature approaching their location at top speed, and he smirked. This has been a rousing discussion, but I must now depart. Perhaps I'll see you again in the future, or perhaps not. Again, it's ultimately your choice. Until then, keep these two alive until they awaken. If anything happens to them, I will hold you personally responsible. With that, Orochimaru sank into the forest floor, leaving her behind with her two unconscious teammates, but not before covertly releasing a white snake and sending it away to hide from the girl. Was he actually going to leave it up to her? Of course not. He knew that Osu, Zaku, and Kin would hunt Team 7 down to kill Sasuke on his orders eventually, and when they did, Sasuke and Naruto would not leave any traces of their remains for the forest creatures to scavenge. However, in the event that they encountered them before the two awoke, the girl would have to protect them with her life. Should she survive long enough for his prizes to come too, the white snake would bite her and mark her with the cursed seal of earth. That way, Konoha would never truly trust her even if she did want to sell her teammates out, severely limiting her options. She wasn't even a fraction as valuable to them as Anko was, so disposing of a potential flight risk wouldn't be a difficult decision for them to make in her case. Speaking of Anko, she was nearing his location like a heat-seeking missile. Orochimaru's mirth grew even more sinister. It was time for a reunion. For some reason, Naruto no longer felt any pain. It was strange, the last thing he remembered was being bitten by that snake creep and his entire body exploding with pain. It felt as if someone injected molten lava into his chakra network. He didn't even know how long he was writhing in the most excruciating pain of his life before darkness took him, and now he felt fine. No, that wasn't accurate. He didn't feel much of anything, actually. He barely even registered the ankle-high water he was standing in. Why was he standing in water in the first place? Where even was he? A quick look around found him in a dark concrete corridor with pipes lining the walls. Some of the pipes were thin and had a faint blue glow to them, whereas the others were much larger, were glowing red, and were audibly humming like they were fit to burst. The pipes led down the dark expanse toward the light at the end of the tunnel, where he could hear rumbling emanating from. Following the pipes toward the light only made the rumbling clear. It was a voice, and it was as distressed as it was booming. As he drew closer, he was able to make out the anger, confusion, and worry laced within the shouting, and he could only wonder as to what was generating so much discontent. Then, he heard the second voice, and his question was answered. The new voice was simply shouting distorted gibberish back at the first one, but it unsettled Naruto to his core. The sound hitting his ears was nestled so deep within the uncanny valley while simultaneously being so viciously alien. It was like a facsimile of a person barking the most eldritch signals at him from the far reaches of his very soul. He so desperately did not want to continue his trek, but he knew that he wouldn't get any answers if he didn't. Gulping his fear, he reluctantly pressed on. As he finally reached the end of the corridor and stepped into the light of the room, the scene shocked him beyond understanding. "Begone from my domain, you unholy monster." A frazzled Kyuubi howled from behind a gargantuan set of bars at a smaller, sickly gray creature with 10 tentacles bound to the floor by tattooed white snakes. The Kyuubi's head snapped in the direction of Naruto, and he collapsed to the ground under the monumental creature's sudden scrutiny. "Human." The Kyuubi bellowed at Naruto. "Get rid of this thing." After taking a moment to regain his bearings and to assure himself that his pants were only wet because of the water he had fallen in, Naruto quickly moved past the fact that this was his very first meeting with the Kyuubi of legend, the very same creature that had indirectly been the cause of his life being the way that it was. He could wrap his head around that later. Instead, he looked at the creature in question and tried to make sense of it to no avail. "What is that?" Naruto finally found his voice to respond to the fox, pointing to the wriggling mass of he wasn't even sure what the hell it was even made of. Was that flesh? Wood? What even was that? "It's an abomination." The Kyuubi snarled. "Get it out of here. Can someone explain what the hell is going on here?" Naruto shouted as his fear and confusion finally bled into frustration. "Oh my fucking shit, brat," the Kyuubi angrily grumbled with one of his paws clutching the top of his snout. "You used my power to fight the snake summoner, and then you disgraced my glorious name by losing to a lowly flesh bag and getting our connection cut with a 5-element seal. I don't know what happened after that until this." He turned his hateful gaze to the 10-tailed creature writhing about just outside of the bars. This thing showed up and broke the 5-element seal entirely. After that, it devoured a white snake that tried to assert its will over it. "I remember that snake freak biting me," Naruto mused, racking his brain for anything else from before he blacked out. "That explains the seals on its bindings," the Kyuubi quietly mused, but quietly for him would have been loud enough for several nations to hear, so Naruto heard him clearly. "A cursed seal. Of course. What's a cursed seal?" Naruto questioned, scratching his noggin in confusion before pointing at the other creature once again. "And what the hell even is that thing?" The Kyuubi stared down at him in a prolonged silence. To Naruto, it looked like the walking calamity was thinking hard about something. Whether it was if he should answer Naruto's question or just eat him, he didn't know. "What do you know of the Biju?" The Kyuubi finally spoke up, his tone far less aggressive but just as serious. Naruto squinted at the Kyuubi. "Wait, you're not the only one." The long-suffering sigh that escaped the massive Biju spoke only of the purest exhaustion. There weren't a lot of things in this world that Sakura hated. It wasn't a healthy emotion to hold. That didn't mean that she didn't dislike things, however. She disliked spicy foods, for one. She had a weird relationship with Ino, they were once best friends, and now they were bitter love rivals, constantly vying for Sasuke's attention and taking scathing shots at each other along the way, so Sakura supposed that she wasn't too fond of her honestly, it was kind of stupid the more she thought about it. She really didn't like the way that people around the village looked at Naruto like he was the lowest of scum. It especially irked her what some clients during D-ranks would whisper about him when they thought he couldn't hear them, and even when they knew he could. What the hell gave them the right to treat someone that way? This spiky-haired fuckhead above her and his bastard teammates, though. She hated them with every fiber of her being. She hated the arrogance dripping off of them. She hated the callousness they held not just for their enemies, but for each other as well. She hated them for daring to threaten her teammates while laughing her off like some kind of non-threatening puppy. If they wanted to kill Sasuke so badly, they were going to have to go through her corpse to do it. Granted, that's exactly what they were well on their way to accomplishing, given that they had beaten not only her, but also Rock Lee and Team 10 in short order. Shamefully, all she could do was bite down on the hand of the one she hated the most of the trio, while he battered her face in his efforts to get her off. At least, that was until an explosion of vile chakra radiated from the hollow which Sasuke and Naruto were stashed in. Everybody's attention was yanked to the form of Sasuke stepping out of the tree, the left side of his body blanketed with black markings and wisps of visible purple chakra sparking off of him. "Sasuke," Sakura said, relief washing over her until whatever she planned to say next caught in her throat. Sasuke was radiating the third most malicious aura she had felt since they first encountered Zabuza, and his expression was as dark as the forest surrounding them. She was seeing whatever Orochimaru had done to them manifest for the first time. Sasuke, she hesitantly called out to him, and his two blazing Sharingan shifted to look her over, taking in her battered and bruised appearance. "Sakura, who did this to you?" Sasuke asked in a voice that chilled her to the bone. "It was me, the spiky-haired one," Zaku boastfully declared. "What are you gonna do about it? You gonna cry? Gonna cry like your little pink teammate? You look like a bitch." "Yeah, Sakura definitely hated that one the most." "Zaku, don't," the bandaged one began to say before Zaku cut him off. "Don't worry about it, Dosu," he said, raising his palms directly at them for a jutsu that she was way too familiar with by now. "I'll blow them away in one fell swoop." That's what he then attempted to do, and he might have even succeeded if she hadn't felt Sasuke yoink her out of the way before depositing her and Naruto out of harm's way faster than she could blink. Before she knew it, Sasuke was relentlessly beating Zaku down, while his two teammates looked on in shock. Why they weren't stepping in to help, Sakura wasn't entirely sure, but she wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. She grabbed a now jittering Naruto and inconspicuously dragged him towards more cover, just as Sasuke locked Zaku's arms in his grasp and placed his foot onto his back. "You seem to be very proud of these arms of yours," Sasuke mused in a chilling tone as Sakura made it to a nearby tree. "You must be very attached to them." Hey, hold on a sec was all Zaku managed before his arms were wrenched from their sockets and his screams echoed through the forest, enough to be heard by several teams miles away. Sakura did her best to ignore the sounds of anguish while she was nestling Naruto behind a thick tree trunk. His shaking worried her, so when she placed a hand on his forehead, she expected to feel him burning up from a fever. She certainly wasn't expecting to be literally blown away and sent tumbling into another tree by an even stronger burst of vile power. The second burst captured everyone's attention, even Sasuke's, as he stopped his approach toward a frightened Dosu with a scroll in his hand. The chakra that enveloped the area was suffocating, everyone present could practically taste the dark ancient abyss that had just opened up in front of them. Even Lee, whose eardrums were still shot to hell, had been shaken awake by the otherworldly terror that had suddenly crept upon them. Sakura could only watch in mute horror as Naruto slowly rose to his feet, jagged thorny swirls cascading over his body and glowing red hot before his skin began to lose pigmentation entirely. Soon, the lightly tanned skin that she was so familiar with had become deathly pale and marred with scales and feathers. He was hunched over, but a clawed hand digging into the damaged tree trunk brought him to his full height as he faced the rest of the assembled genin. Sakura could only see the back of him, but the same wasn't true for the others in the clearing. Naruto's whisker marks had boldened into straight black blocks on his white cheeks, and his normally vibrant gaze was dull and unfocused, as if he was barely even present mentally and equally unaware of anyone else there. That wasn't the case, however. A faint, practically unnoticeable shiver from Dosu at the monstrous power Naruto was radiating was his undoing, as Naruto's head quite literally snapped in his direction, and his eyes were no longer unfocused. Dosu swore the ghosts of two crimson pools filled with Tomo sat over the cerulean gaze currently stabbing right through his soul, but those were all the thoughts he was able to have before his world went black. Naruto appeared before Dosu faster than most of the clearing could even fathom and leveled a punch so vicious that not only was the squelching of Dosu's chest caving in heard by everyone present, but Dosu was also blasted backward and sent careening through dozens of trees on his path to oblivion. The only traces of Dosu left behind in the spot he once occupied were small spatters of blood and the scroll he was holding. The strangled yelp from Kin captured his attention next, and Kin, bless her heart, shakily brandished a few senbon to defend herself with. They were promptly smacked out of her hand by her barely human attacker who was suddenly in front of her before she was backhanded and sent on a collision course with the nearest tree. Unfortunately, a fistful of her long hair yanked her back and kept her from going too far, leaving her to the mercy of the creature who was supposed to be a loudmouth brat of little importance. Instead, she was trapped in place beneath a horrifyingly blank gaze, staring into her like two portals to the worst hell imaginable. Please," she whimpered, wholly unconcerned with how pitiful she sounded in lieu of simply wanting to stay alive. Her attacker simply tilted its head and looked toward the nearest tree. It stared for a brief moment before looking back at Kin with a thoughtful gleam in those evil eyes. Kin did not like that gleam one bit. "And that is how we bid you came to be," the Kyuubi finished his Cliff Notes explanation of Kagaya, the Jubi, and the Sage of Six Paths for the fleshy simpleton in front of him. Naruto marveled, still wrapping his mind around the fantastical nature of the tale while nearly suffering from information overload. Then, he pointed to the strangely silent mini-Jubi. "You all came from that thing. A far more powerful and destructive version of that, but yes," the Kyuubi affirmed. Naruto slowly nodded, finally reckoning with the magnitude of everything he had been told. Let it never be said that Naruto was stupid. An idiot, sure, but not stupid. He briefly gazed at the creature, then he looked back at the bars holding the Kyuubi back, and then he took on a thoughtful expression. "So, as long as it's locked up inside of me, it can't do any harm, right?" Naruto asked his tenant. "No." The Kyuubi furiously snarled at him, knocking him on his ass from the sheer force of his bellowing. The snake summoner was playing with forces far beyond his understanding. That thing should not exist. Every second it does, there's the inevitability that it will break its shackles and escape. When that happens, my existence will be in danger. And the rest of the world. Naruto cried in horror. The Kyuubi blinked. "Yeah, sure, them too I guess." He fixed Naruto with a serious glare. "More importantly, it's an unstable mass of chakra right now, so it will use the cursed seal and your vessel as a means of maintaining itself. If that mockery of the Jubi were to take you over, it would absorb me, and then it would do the same to every other Biju until it restores its full power. Nothing in this world would be able to stop it once that happens. I don't even want to imagine what would occur if it manages to reach the husk of the original. I will grant you as much of my chakra as you need, as long as we expunge this abomination from existence." Naruto nodded his understanding, and then a small smile crept onto his face. "You're nothing like the stories say, you know. I thought you'd be mean, angry, and scary all the time, not helpful. There's a world-ending catastrophe not 20 feet from me," the Kyuubi scoffed. "Make no mistake, I hate you and all of your kind, but even being chained to you for the foreseeable future is preferable to the fate that awaits me. Should we not dispose of this monstrosity before it grows any stronger? Can't you just, I don't know, burn it with your chakra or something?" Naruto spitballed. "You're like 100 times its size right now. Even if it's wicked strong, it can't be as strong as you, right?" The Kyuubi shook his head. "Even so, it's far too powerful for me to simply consume or assimilate it as I am right now. I'll need my other half. With my full power restored, I could destroy it with minimal issue." Naruto blinked. "Your other half. Your blasted Yondaime only sealed half of me into you," he growled. "He took my other half with him to the Shinigami. Is there a way to get it back?" The Kyuubi was about to shake his head, but he paused when a memory of his time within Mito Uzumaki came back to him. He silently mused the idea for a few seconds longer before setting his sights back on Naruto. "Theoretically. It's not impossible, though it is currently improbable. You'll need to do some digging to find the location of the Uzumaki temple." "Wait, Uzumaki temple?" Naruto exclaimed. "There are others." Upon seeing the Kyuubi's exasperated sigh, Naruto shook his head with a frown that was on the path to becoming smoldering. "No, you're right, we'll deal with that after I wake up. There are a lot of things I need to figure out when I wake up." "You're already awake." Naruto paused his darkening train of thought and stared back at the fox in confusion. "What? The Jubi has been piloting you? You need to reassert control if you want to leave the mindscape. Were you not aware?" "No." Naruto shouted. "How would I even know that, and why didn't you say anything? What, am I your prisoner and your babysitter?" The Kyuubi scoffed. Naruto nearly pulled his hair out. "Ugh, just tell me how to take back control of my body." "You're far too weak to overpower the Jubi on your own," the Kyuubi informed. "However, perhaps a flood of my chakra could disturb the connection enough to allow you to wrench control away from it." Naruto sighed, but his expression was one of determination. "It's worth a shot. Mihoiminoi. Miyoiminoi hamamoi." Sakura was experiencing many things at that moment. Horror at the gruesome scene ahead of them, worry for both of her teammates, and confusion at the gibberish Naruto was hollering as he repeatedly slammed Kin's face, or what remained of it, into a tree trunk. Speaking of Kin, the bloody imprint of her face would have been left in the tree trunk if said trunk wasn't bending and cracking upon the constant impacts of a head being slammed into it. She had been dead for a while at that point, but no one in the clearing moved a muscle for fear that Naruto's attention would fall upon them next. As far as Team 10 was concerned, so long as Naruto's attention was firmly planted on Kin's corpse, they were still alive. The same couldn't be said for Sakura, though. She wasn't going to let her team slip into whatever darkness Orochimaru was trying to plunge them into, and that brought her to her feet and rushing forward. "Naruto." She desperately called out to him before an arm shot out to stop her approach. "Stay back, Sakura," Sasuke instructed, the cursed seal still active as he stared Naruto down with his Sharingan. Whatever's inside of Naruto is still in control. True to his word, Naruto's unsettling gaze was now on his team, and the tension in the clearing was reaching a fever pitch. Even with the cursed seal addling his mind, Sasuke knew that he was no match for whatever the hell had gotten into his teammate. Not even the boost from the cursed seal compared to the power that he could practically taste emanating from Naruto. He could gather that Orochimaru had done something similar to Naruto that he did to him, but it must have been exponentially more horrific to create this. Sasuke didn't move and prevented Sakura from moving, while his piercing Sharingan glare scanned Naruto over for any possible weakness to exploit if it came to a fight, and he could sense the Hyuga in the trees doing the same on the other side. However, just as Naruto took a single step and Sasuke readied for action, Naruto keeled over and grunted, and a thick red miasma suddenly overtook him. The dark all-consuming malice radiating from the noxious chakra was the final straw for Team 10, and they vacated the scene without looking back. Elsewhere, however, someone else was having very different thoughts. While Tenten was still rooted in place, Neji felt the most anxious he had since the last instance of his uncle activating his caged bird seal. What he had seen when activating his Byakugan on Naruto when he attacked the Odo Nin would stay with him for the rest of his life. Such an unfathomable quantity of chakra cascading over an indescribably evil powder keg lurking in the abyss. To make matters worse, the abyss itself felt alive, conscious, even. When he peered at it with his Byakugan, it stared right back at him, and he felt as if he had just made himself a target to be devoured in the future. Not only was that boy dangerous, but he also appeared entirely uninhibited in battle and didn't make any indications of familiarity when looking at his own teammates for that brief moment of respite. Neji knew how much he outclassed the rest of his genin peers, but even he knew that should he be on the opposite side of the battlefield with Naruto in these exams, he would die. So, Naruto Uzumaki would simply have to die first before that could even occur. A gentle fist strike to the brainstem while he was currently vulnerable would be sufficient. What he did not account for when he leaped to strike, however, was Sasuke Uchiha intercepting his charge and clutching his wrist in a death grip. "One more step and I will end you, Hyuga," Sasuke growled dangerously at him, standing protectively over a writhing Naruto, while Sakura hurried over to Naruto's side. Furious Sharingan met Stone Cold Byakugan in a fierce battle of wills. The black markings dressing Sasuke did not deter Neji, and neither did the bulging veins of the Byakugan dissuade Sasuke. Neither were going to back down of their own volition, and as the seconds ticked on, it appeared certain that a battle to the death would take place there and then. "Neji, come on, let's go," Tenten worriedly spoke up, placing a hand on Neji's shoulder, with Lee standing wobbly on the other side supported by her other arm. Her pleading gaze and the unsteady Lee to her side were just enough to get him to relent, and he sneered at Sasuke before stepping back. He shot Team 7 another dirty look before leaving with his team, and Sasuke simply sighed after he was gone. A groan from Naruto that wasn't incoherent gibberish brought his attention back to his teammates in time to see Sakura fretting over Naruto. The red chakra had disappeared and his skin and hair had returned to normal. "Oh man," Naruto muttered as Sakura helped him back to his feet. "That wasn't pleasant." "Naruto?" Sakura hazarded, glad that he seemed to be back in his right mind, but completely unsure of what to make of what had happened. "Are you okay?" Upon seeing the genuine concern pouring out of Sakura, Naruto's first instinct was to put up a bright smile and assuage her worries with some kind of empty platitude. However, Naruto simply did not have the energy, compulsion, or even the desire to put on a front. "No," Naruto plainly answered, surprising both Sakura and Sasuke with the dullness of his voice. "But I'll be okay. Can't afford to not be. I have things to do and questions I need answered." That was a level of introspection that neither knew Naruto to be capable of. Sasuke analyzed his words and actually found himself slightly re-evaluating his blonde comrade. He, dare he say, actually empathized with him on something other than the pain of loneliness. Sakura, on the other hand, found herself growing even more concerned with the response. "Is it about your parents?" she quietly asked, and she immediately wished she hadn't and chastised herself for so stupidly touching that nerve after Orochimaru had practically dragged it along concrete. Even Sasuke was now paying far more attention, clearly having missed something between being bitten by Orochimaru and waking up. Naruto fought back an instinctual wince, and then he sighed, the smile he offered Sakura looking far more genuine than the megawatt beam he usually sported. "Like I said, I'll be okay." "No," Sakura declared, catching Naruto and Sasuke off guard by pulling the both of them into a hug. "We'll be okay. We're Team 7, and Team 7 sticks together. Through everything." Now, it was Naruto's turn to be taken aback alongside Sasuke. He wasn't used to this level of physical intimacy from, well, anyone, least of all the girl he seemed to do nothing but annoy with his advances. Sasuke wasn't faring much better, having not received a hug since he walked in on his freshly cut down parents, laying in a pool of their blood at the feet of his brother. For both, it was an odd, painfully unfamiliar sensation, but it wasn't particularly unwelcome, so it was very unfortunate when a white snake slithered out of the ether and rudely interrupted the moment by accosting Sakura and biting her on the neck. The sudden shock of the attack swiftly gave way to an explosion of pain that immediately lanced through her body, bringing her to her knees in an agonized screaming fit. "Sakura!" Naruto cried, but his worried shouts were drowned out by her pained wailing. Sasuke tried to catch the white snake before it could slither away, but it was much too quick and vanished into the undergrowth like a thief in the night. Cursing, he turned back around and joined Naruto in huddling over Sakura as she convulsed on the forest floor with absolutely no idea what to do to help her. The appearance of 3 black curved marks sitting in a ripple pattern near the spot where she was bitten only made their hearts plummet like rocks to the pits of their stomachs. Orochimaru was proud of himself. Well, that wasn't an uncommon occurrence, this time he had so much reason to feel like the impeccable genius he was. He could feel the awakening of Sasuke's cursed seal of heaven, meaning he had survived its application and was one step closer to joining him at his side. Even so, well, that was all well and good, it wasn't what tickled Orochimaru the most. No, that honor was bestowed to the collective chill that had run up the spines of everyone within the walls of Konoha. The cursed seal of hell was a rousing success. It wasn't an overwhelming wave of chakra akin to a Bijuu's appearance that settled over the village. It was far more subdued, like a silent, otherworldly dread, settling into the core of anyone within range. It was a positively delicious sensation that gave even him momentary pause. He hadn't expected the conglomeration of every Bijuu's chakra to feel that unnerving, and he could only imagine what it may have felt like at ground zero. It had his former sensei out of his office and observing the forest of death like a hawk, though that was likely in part due to Anko no doubt having already reported her encounter with him earlier on. Still, even with the Anbu and Jonin on high alert, keeping out of sight was no trouble at all. The only person in the village he had to worry about detecting him was the old fool anyway. If that old monkey knew what was good for him, he would neither cancel the exams nor pull Naruto and Sasuke out of them. Orochimaru wanted a front row seat for the fruits of his labor. He wanted to see the potential he witnessed in action and uninhibited by the baggage they carried every second of their miserable lives. He wanted to see his future vessel and his newest project showcase the power of Orochimaru before the very village that would be destroyed no sooner afterward. Until then, he did sniff out another Uzumaki wandering around with a Kusa headband. Perhaps he could procure some added incentive for Naruto, should he choose to be as stubborn as his mother was. The first thing Sakura was met with when she opened her eyes was further darkness. Surrounding her was a black void that stretched as far as she could see in all directions. She didn't know where she was or why she was even there except, "It's about time you showed up." Sakura jumped at the sudden voice, but the fact that it was her own voice she heard unsettled her even more. Turning around, she was faced with herself. Or rather, a jagged white outline of herself that felt void of any warmth to speak of. If that wasn't unsettling enough, the white snake wrapped snugly around her neck and the almost contemptuous gleam in her eyes put Sakura on edge. "Who are you?" Sakura eventually worked up the nerve to ask. "You can call me Inner," the other Sakura responded curtly. "I'm all of the thoughts and feelings that you compartmentalize to make your existence less uncomfortable." On top of not really knowing how to unpack that revelation, there was a noticeable bite to Inner's tone that Sakura didn't know what to make of. Inner cut her off before she could voice any of those concerns, though. "I'm all of your insecurities and all of your fears," she continued, her tone growing more sardonic with each word. "I'm every uncouth comment, every intrusive thought, and every compulsion you've ever had to follow the call of the void. Hell, I'm even all of the giggles you strangled when you heard about Naruto's pranks to avoid a hit from our father." Sakura winced. "I don't understand." "There's no need to lie," Inner chuckled in a mixture of mirth and derision. "I can see it in your eyes. You understand perfectly, you just refuse to accept it." "There's nothing to accept." Sakura snapped, momentarily surprising even herself before her face hardened when she dropped all pretenses and she motioned to Inner. "I can't be this. I can't be you." "I'm you," Inner dully replied. "No, you're not." She furiously shot back. "You're everything that's wrong with me." Inner's already unimpressed expression soured into a sneer. "According to who?" "The family we hate." "I don't hate them." Sakura refuted. "I thought I said there was no need to lie." Inner chastised, her unimpressed sneer remaining. "Hatred is such an ugly emotion," Mom always said before cursing the fox that ended Dad's shinobi career. Right before leveling another scathing remark about our intelligence or our figure. Right before Dad blows up about something totally innocuous. Some family, huh? No wonder we found ourselves anew the first chance we got. No matter how hard Sakura racked her brain for any sort of response to that, none came. She couldn't dispute Inner's words in any way, and it stung worse than any pointed barb or any lingering handprint. All of the turmoil that she so diligently evaded for so long was finally beginning to sneak up on her, regardless of how far into the recesses of her mind she stuffed it. Still, she needed to respond with something. "How do you know all of this?" she lowly asked. It was a stupid question, and Sakura knew it. However, Inner merely snorted with a small smile before stepping closer to Sakura. "I am who you truly hate the most in this world, and I'm also the only one who's always going to be there for you no matter what. Sasuke and Naruto won't abandon me." She found the nerve to shout back once again. "You can't rely on them forever," Inner shrugged. "Sooner or later, you'll have to stand on your own 2 feet or else they'll leave you in the dust. That'll never happen so long as we remain separate." "Remain separate?" she questioned, finally noticing the white snake wrapped around Inner's neck, eyeing her curiously. You will never be able to stand alongside your better family if you continue to run from who you really are, Ina reiterated, extending her hand as an unsettling smile developed on the outline that was her face. Orochimaru granted us an opportunity to reach our full potential, and we'll never reach it separately. You have to let go and finally embrace who you are. Sakura warily eyed the offered hand, and then she locked eyes with the jagged outline of herself that was somehow still a solid entity. How do I know that you're really who you say you are? How do I know that this isn't just a fabrication from Orochimaru? You don't, Ina grinned. Does it really matter at this point? Sakura didn't respond to that. She continued staring at Ina while a storm raged within her brain. Sasuke, Naruto, and even Kakashi-sensei were front and center in her mind's eye. Every morning, she'd leave her home as quickly as possible, doing her best to brush off the insidious thoughts that she was lower than dirt, only to step into the training ground and become awash with a warmth that she so desperately wanted to feel for years. Naruto's exuberance, Sasuke's aloofness, and Kakashi-sensei's indecipherable quirkiness were all that she had to cherish for the last few months, and cherish she did. Despite their bickering, despite their sensei's habits, and despite how seemingly nonsensical their grouping felt at times, they all cared about each other and always protected each other when it mattered. Team 7 was like a family. They were her better family. Sakura took Ina's hand in her own, and the two stepped forward and embraced each other. Little by little, the jagged outline of Ina softened into a fine sketch until she vanished within Sakura entirely. The snake soon followed suit, finding itself wrapped around Sakura's neck before melting into her as well. In its place, chains of contorting, parallel lines began spreading across her body, and a flood of chakra surged through her. Naruto and Sasuke were hesitant to allow the enigmatic Kabuto to look over Sakura. Not only had he revealed himself to have information on many other people in the exam, some of which he logically should not have had, but he had admitted to having failed the exam 6 times before. In both of their minds, there was nothing a guy like that could offer them, and they wanted to dismiss him outright as a result, but neither could deny the practical experience that came with years on the job. So, that was how they begrudgingly found themselves watching intently from the sidelines as the older teen ran a diagnostic on Sakura with medical ninjutsu. Kabuto's glowing palm scanned over her unconscious body while he hummed an appraisal. What exactly he was appraising, neither Naruto nor Sasuke knew, and it was beginning to irritate them. I did what I could for the prior injuries, but beyond that, she seems mostly fine, Kabuto informed the two as his palm scanned over her collarbone, and then he paused. That's odd. What? What's wrong? Naruto demanded, scuttling over to them with Sasuke not too far behind. There seems to be a buildup of chakra in the general area of her collarbone, Kabuto innocuously mused. I'm not entirely sure what it's for, and since I'm not a censor, I can't determine the nature of. Kabuto was cut off when Sakura's foot planted itself in his crotch. He didn't even get a chance to yelp before her foot impacted him 3 more times in rapid succession, and her eyes shot open as the cursed seal of earth spread across her skin. She quickly scooted backward, meanwhile, Kabuto fell to the forest floor in a fetal position as high-pitched sputtering choked out of his throat. Sakura. Naruto shouted before appearing at her side. You're okay. We were so worried that the stupid white snake did something horrible to you. Sasuke was especially worried. He wouldn't even let Kabuto get within 10 feet of you at first. Shut up, idiot, Sasuke gritted out after bonking Naruto in the head. Give her some space, she just came to. Naruto shot Sasuke a dirty look before grimacing and sending Sakura a sheepish smile. Oh, sorry Sakura. Standing up, Naruto and Sasuke took in Sakura's appearance. Kabuto had said that she was mostly fine beyond a buildup of chakra, and now it was plain to see just what that was. Both boys subconsciously rubbed the marks that Orochimaru had bestowed upon them as they and Sakura analyzed the markings of her cursed seal. Sakura, Sasuke broke the silence, and he couldn't help but think back to the violent rush he felt when his mark activated for the first time. How do you feel? Sakura remained silent for a few moments, marveling at her skin and at the unfamiliar unity she felt within both her core and her brain, all the while pointedly ignoring the mousy squeals of agony coming from Kabuto a few feet away. Clenching her fist, she turned to her 2 teammates with a genuine smile. Better than ever. Does this tower feel bigger on the inside to you guys? Naruto asked his teammates as they walked down a long hallway toward a set of large doors. Oh, good, it's not just me, Sakura sighed in relief, and Naruto grinned in vindication. What about you, Sasuke? He asked his other teammate, his grin not faltering an inch at Sasuke's apparent lack of interest. Doesn't matter, Sasuke dismissed. We need to get to the arena. Ah, come on. Naruto bemoaned. Don't be such a stick in the mud, Sasuke. We just passed the second test. Barely, Sasuke grunted, quickening his pace toward the looming double doors at the end of the admittedly arduous hallway. We had minutes to spare. If there's one thing I learned at the academy, it's that passing is passing. Naruto rebutted, snatching his 2 taller teammates into his grasp and wrapping his arms around their necks. Right, Sakura. Sakura groaned, but a fond titter escaped her by the end. As much as the thought kills me, I have to agree. Passing is passing, Sasuke. It was Sasuke's turn to groan, and he lightly wrenched himself out of Naruto's grasp. Whatever. Let's just get this over with so we can leave and get back to civilization. You two seriously need a bath. Hey. Both Naruto and Sakura squawked in indignation, but a quick cautious sniff of her muddy kippao curbed Sakura's ire. Naruto, in his open, scuffed, and dirty tracksuit, however, was not so easily cowed. You smell like shit too, jackass. Sasuke's following smirk was almost enough to send Naruto over the edge. I smell like shit because we just spent 5 days fighting in the forest of death. You smell like shit because you always do. We are not the same. Naruto would have lunged to strangle his teammate if it weren't for Sakura preemptively clamping a fistful of his hair to ensure that he behaved, so he had to settle for huffing in frustration. You better hope that the next test isn't one-on-one fights, otherwise I'm gonna shove my foot so far up your ass that the next tomato you bite into will be with my toes. Sakura's hold over Naruto's hair slackened as a chortle escaped her, a chortle that quickly grew into a giggle fit. In contrast, Sasuke strangled a snort and kept his gaze forward to conceal the amusement washing over him at that absurd imagery. It was pointless to resist, however. Naruto knew he had won the battle, and even Sakura could tell that the joke was effective. Team 7's Tsundere was finally emerging from his shell little by little. Upon finally reaching the doors and entering the arena, Team 7 was understandably taken aback by its sheer size, so much so that even Sasuke had to mentally walk back his earlier dismissal of Naruto's observation of the tower. Beyond the confounding interior of the tower, the next thing they noticed was the stairs being sent their way. Most were brief, Team 10's gazes were very, very brief, in fact. Some stares lingered, however, such as the gaze of their sensei standing beside the Sandaime when he set his eye on them. Even from across the arena, Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura could see the tension evaporate from Kakashi's body upon their arrival. Moseying up to the rest of the present genin and saddling beside Team 8, they were able to get a better look at what was potentially going through their sensei's mind. There were a lot of brief flickers of emotion in his one visible eye when scanning over them, not the least of which were relief, pride, apprehension, and was that regret. What could he possibly be regretful over? Then, Sakura and Sasuke noticed that the regret was most prevalent when he looked at Naruto. The two shared a brief look that confirmed their shared confusion before they set their sights on an abnormally blank-looking Naruto. Sakura had a few ideas as to what might have been the cause of that, but it wasn't her place to prod or speculate. She knew that Naruto would ask those questions when he was ready, whatever that readiness possibly entailed given their new circumstances. Naruto, meanwhile, was weathering 3 separate storms at once. The first and most pressing was the curiosity buried under a sea of bloodlust rolling off of Gaara to his left, as it was disturbing both of the creatures within him. He could practically feel the Jubi turn its grotesque head and bore a hole straight through Gaara with its red, rippled eye, almost as if it was staring at something. Whatever that something was, Naruto couldn't tell, but he could actually feel the Kyuubi trying to exercise some level of dominance over the seal to varying degrees of success, and it was causing faint wisps of the fox's chakra to leak from him at odd intervals. That only served to bring even more eyes on him, but he truly did not care about most of them. What stuck in his craw was the Sandaime's gaze locked on him. That was the second storm. After the stuff Orochimaru revealed to him in the forest, Naruto did not know what to think regarding the old man, and he was content to not think about it at all, at least until he had a moment to himself to sort things out. He clearly wasn't going to get that right now, so he was left hyper-aware of the differences in the Hokage's gaze toward him. The warmness in his aged countenance, which Naruto was starting to realize was inherent to all Konoha shinobi the old man presided over, wasn't present, in its place was an intense, searching blankness. It wasn't outwardly hostile, but it did feel distant, and Naruto couldn't help but return that measure of distance when he met the man's steely gaze. The third storm, however, was the strangest one to parse. He could easily disregard most of the stares he was receiving, he didn't care about the faint but noticeable buzzing under Shino's coat to his right, nor did he care for the weirdo who looked like Hinata staring daggers at him and Sasuke. Instead, it was the second exam proctor that got his attention, but he didn't know what to make of what he was seeing. Her regard of him was intense, but it was also searching with flickers of concern and something that Naruto nearly didn't recognize. Empathy. If nothing else, seeing any amount of empathy toward him in the eyes of anyone who wasn't his team, the Ichirokas or Iruka-sensei, was a surprise of the highest order. It didn't help matters that she was doing the same to Sasuke. Just what was her deal? First up, Sasuke Uchiha vs Yoroi Akato. That announcement snapped Naruto out of his musings, and he saw most of the participants leaving the floor and heading towards the viewing platforms on either side of the arena. He caught a glimpse of Kakashi-sensei whispering something into Sasuke's ear before Sakura took his arm and led him up the stairs to one of the platforms. "Are you okay, Naruto?" Sakura asked in a somewhat hushed voice as they took their place near the other Konoha teams. You seem a little out of it. Yeah, I'm good, he quickly assured, though his tone was much dimmer than usual. Just got a lot on my mind. Nothing to worry about. She sent him a knowing look and rubbed his back to ensure that he knew she would be there for him whenever he needed, and he sent her a thankful smile in return. Just then, their sensei flickered beside them with a pleased eye smile. Congratulations on passing the second exam, he remarked, affectionately ruffling his charge's hair before his expression grew a touch more serious. We'll talk about what happened in the forest after the preliminaries are done. Naruto simply nodded before turning his gaze to the arena below, but his attention was elsewhere. The business with the old man wasn't going to leave his mind anytime soon, nor would the glances he was still receiving from the crazy snake lady. He still didn't understand why, but a shudder caused by the Kyuubi's chakra fluctuating again brought his irritation inward. Hey, Kyuubi, can you two keep it down? Your chakra is all over the place. Well, excuse me for trying to keep the world in one piece for just a little longer, you ungrateful brat. I'll be sure to let the greatest force of destruction existence has ever witnessed out to wreak havoc next time. That's not what I. Naruto cut his train of thought before softly sighing. Ugh, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm a little messed up right now and I shouldn't have taken that out on you. He didn't register the sudden, surprised silence from the beast for what it actually was, simply assuming that the Kyuubi was allowing him an opportunity to verbalize his turmoil. It's just why is the old man always lying to me? He's been doing it my whole life. He lied about why the village hates me, he's lying about my parents, he lied about Hijiki tasting good in ramen, and he even lied about what was in his pipe that one time. I know what tobacco smells like, and that wasn't it. Your insignificant human woes mean absolutely nothing to me. Naruto grinned, which those on the outside took as him being pleased with Sasuke battling back from Yoroi's assault. Well, it's a good thing that you're a captive audience, huh? I hate everything about you. Ugh, come on, Kyuubi. You're already like the smartest guy I know. Even smarter than Sakura. You have to have some idea why the old man insists on lying to me all the time. Another silence followed those words, but this one was shorter than the last one. Because lying to you is far more convenient than the alternative. What's the alternative? Not lying to you, Dumbus. Naruto scowled, which was taken as displeasure at Sasuke's difficulty fighting back the cursed seal on the outside. You know what I meant, fuzzball. What's so bad about telling me the truth for once? Because showering you with falsehoods and feeding you honeyed words keeps you loyal. Steering you as far away from the truth as possible in favor of pushing you deeper into propaganda keeps you from achieving self-actualization. It isn't a shinobi's job to self-actualize. It's a shinobi's job to be a disposable tool to the ends of warmongers until you can no longer serve. Naruto blinked, taking in the frank summation. Is that actually it? Naruto could practically hear the Kyuubi shrug. That's what it boils down to. Oh, Naruto muttered aloud, though it went unnoticed beside Sakura cheering at Sasuke's victory. Do you think Orochimaru was lying to me, too? He wouldn't be the first, and he won't be the last. You just have to find out how many of his words have merit and then kill him for concocting this abomination beside me. Hurry up and retrieve my other half. Naruto. He was yanked out of his mind once again, this time by Sakura waving her hand in front of his face. What's up? It's your turn, Kakashi pointed out, motioning to the electronic board. Naruto Uzumaki vs Kiba and Yazuka. Oh, cool, Naruto muttered, trying, and failing, to drum up a modicum of excitement for his fight. It didn't go unnoticed by Sakura, and she sent him a look of concern that he tried to assuage with as bright of a smile that he could bring himself to fabricate. Before he could go too far, though, Kakashi grabbed his shoulder and leaned to whisper in his ear. Don't use your cursed seal, he instructed with the utmost seriousness, and Naruto knew that his sensei meant business. He didn't know what would happen if he disobeyed, but he wasn't planning on finding out. He didn't want to use the cursed seal, anyway. Still, that didn't mean that he was all that excited to fight. His mind was all over the place, and the Kyuubi's chakra kept sparking from him in his tenant's attempts to keep the Jubi at bay, so long as Gaara was still being Gaara. It was beginning to become very tiresome, all of it was. So, finally come down, huh? Kiba mocked with an arrogant grin. I just assumed you had done the smart thing and forfeited. There's no way a loser like you could stand a chance against me. When Naruto didn't offer him any response, Kiba's grin faltered. Oh, nothing to say. That's not like you. You were always the loud, talentless moron who acted first and thought later in the academy, and I know that hasn't changed so suddenly. Seriously, I don't know what miracle you got to even make it through the forest of death. How long were you planning on riding your teammates' coattails through this exam? Naruto still offered no response, and under closer scrutiny, Kiba realized that Naruto wasn't even all the way present. Hey, asshole, are you fucking looking past me? Naruto, meanwhile, wasn't granting Kiba his full attention. His mind was so scattered across keeping a hold over the Kyuubi's chakra that was simmering even more steadily now, trying to ignore the Sandame's close examination of him and trying to keep his irritation at both Gaara and the other Hyuga's piercing gaze from aggravating him into losing a grip over that chakra. Whatever Kiba was yapping about was going in one ear and out the other until the start of the match was officially called. That was until. You really think a failure like you would ever become Hokage? Ha, what a fucking joke. As if an idiot with no talent, friends, or family would ever rise to the position of Hokage. In fact, I'll be Hokage, and I'll be a way better Hokage than you could ever dream of being. Now, Kiba had Naruto's full attention. Unfortunately, Kiba had Naruto's full attention. You know what, sit this one out, Akamaru, Kiba scoffed, blissfully unaware of the contents of the can he had just opened. We won't even need to team up to take this loser down. Looking back up at Naruto with a derisive grin, he vaguely registered the red haze that strongly smelled of foxes forming over him. He dismissed it, though, as Naruto always smelled of foxes, and he didn't think that there were any tricks in Naruto's bag that he couldn't handle. On the other hand, Naruto only had one thing running through his mind: don't use the cursed seal. And begin. Hayate instructed, clearing away from the field, but remaining ready to jump in at a moment's notice. Kiba smirked at Naruto. Because I'm so nice, I'll even give you one free shot so that you can see just how outclassed you are. Kiba didn't even see Naruto move before a glowing fist slammed into his cheek, rocketing him into the wall and slamming him straight into unconsciousness. Naruto, meanwhile, glanced at Akamaru in his periphery, who did the only logical thing and coughed up a white flag to wave his surrender. Then, Naruto glanced at the Sandame, who still hadn't taken his eyes off of him. Winner, Hayate coughed through his surprise, Naruto Uzumaki. Sparing no one any further glance, Naruto turned and walked away from the scene. He paid no attention to the silence of the arena that was half dumbfounded and half apprehensive. He paid no attention to the increased stares he was receiving from his former classmates, the Jonin of Konoha, and even the team from Suna. He only paid attention to the eyes of his teammates after he climbed the stairs, and any apprehension he was feeling was washed away by the smiling face of Sakura and the approving nod of Sasuke. The look he was receiving from his sensei was less than ecstatic, however. What? Naruto asked. I didn't use the cursed seal. Within an instant, Kakashi grabbed his and Sasuke's shoulders before flickering out of the arena. Kurama sighed as the activity of the Jubi finally died down. His idiot vessel going into a rudimentary cloak did wonders in enforcing his will over the seal, pacifying the Jubi for the moment. With the blonde now on his mind, he couldn't help but think back to the two things that he had said that got under Kurama's pelt. A human apologizing for taking their misplaced anger out on him. What the hell was this, the pure world? And then to later recognize that he was indeed the smartest being in all of existence, even if it was just to seek his guidance for the boy's wholly insignificant issues. Was his father sending echoes into random dunces or something? This was not typical human behavior. No one was ever more than a selfish warmongering wretch to be devoured. Perhaps the blonde flesh bag wasn't so hopeless after all. The passing memory of Kurama watching the idiot in question drink spoiled milk then came to mind, and he shook his head. Kurama wouldn't hold his breath on that. Then, his red gaze landed on the unnaturally still Jubi bound outside of the bars of the seal. He didn't know how long that man's paltry seal would hold the Jubi, but he felt that the longer they waited, the greater the likelihood that it would break its bindings and escape. It needed to be purged before that could happen. Almost as if it knew Kurama was thinking about it, the Jubi's neck twisted with a sickening crack, and its Ren Sharingan was now staring at him directly. Jubi. You, assimilate. Kurama did not back away from the bars, nor did he nervously huddle into a protective ball, with his wide eyes planted on the glowing reminder of the worst woman to ever exist. He did not, and no one could prove otherwise. Kakashi needed to know what deity he pissed off to wind up in this situation. All he wanted was a regular genin squad that understood the true meaning of teamwork and camaraderie, preferably with only a manageable level of emotional trauma to deal with as they aged. Whether or not he actually received the latter was still up for debate, but he at least achieved the former with his team, and he couldn't have been prouder to have them. They were wonderful little monsters that he was genuinely beginning to cherish, eccentricities and all, and after the hell they went through in Nami, especially on the bridge, he had the utmost confidence in their ability to pass the Chunin exams. They'd be tested, certainly, but there were not very many threats that any genin could provide, which would pose difficulty for Sasuke, Naruto, or even Sakura. Two of them were more than capable on their own, but when those three functioned as a unit, they were a sight to see. So, naturally, he was floored when Anko and the Sandame informed him of Orochimaru of the fucking Sannin attacking them in the Forest of Death. Seriously, what the fuck? Why in the bluest of hells was Orochi fucking Maru going after his children? He initially assumed that he'd have to travel into the forest and scrape up their remains when he was first told of what happened, but Anko tried to assuage his concerns by recounting her encounter with Orochimaru. Honestly, he would have preferred that Orochimaru just killed them instead of branding them with his cursed seal. He and Anko had a decent, if not peculiar, enough friendship for him to know the torment his taint caused her for a very long time. Orochimaru seeing fit to brand both Sasuke and Naruto with it only spelled the worst kind of trouble, and he truly did not want to think about what twisted machinations were working in his depraved mind. But that in mind, he gladly drew up 2 Fuinjutsu matrices in order to slap a containment seal on both Sasuke and Naruto, despite the difficulty of properly applying just one of them. It gave him the chance to get a good look at their respective seals as they were screaming in agony and falling into shirtless lumber. Curiously, Sasuke's cursed seal was nearly identical to Anko's, but Naruto's was different. He'd confer with her, the Sandaime, and, hopefully, Jiraiya if he returned to the village soon. "You're missing one." The ominous, silky intonation from the darkness behind him put Kakashi on high alert. Snapping around, he was faced with Orochimaru slowly approaching him with a casual yet very threatening smile. "Orochimaru," Kakashi growled. "I think you'd be able to handle Fuinjutsu of this level, Kakashi," Orochimaru lightly remarked, his dark smile remaining fixed and his posture completely unbothered. "Still, like I said, you're missing one." "What do you mean?" Kakashi demanded, tense and ready to spring into action, even if it meant giving his life to protect Naruto and Sasuke. Orochimaru's smile deepened as if the question amused him. "Oh? Is your third student truly so insignificant that you don't even care that she bears one of my gifts, as well?" Confusion quickly bled into realization, and that realization would shortly grow into panic. "You didn't." Orochimaru's sickening chuckle filled the room, bouncing off the walls to create a ghastly cacophony of depravity. "You didn't even realize it, did you? How delicious." His already dark smile grew even more serpentine as he eyed the 2 unconscious boys behind Kakashi. "It seems I truly won't even have to lift a finger. You all are simply pushing them into my hands. It's only a matter of time until they finally realize that they're wasting away in this miserable village and will never reach their true potential." "What are you even after?" Kakashi pressed. "Why are you targeting these 3? My goals are beyond your understanding," Orochimaru mocked, and then his smile became a smirk. "However, one aspect of it is already in your eye socket." "So, it's the Sharingan you want," Kakashi muttered. "What the hell does that have to do with Naruto and Sakura, then?" "Like I said, the Sharingan is simply one aspect of it. I need various pieces to put my ultimate plans into place, and I just so happened to stumble onto the king, the rook, and the bishop in the forest of death." Orochimaru's face grew thoughtful, and one of his hands left his pocket to cup his chin. "Though, the bishop might be more of a silver general as of now. I haven't really gotten a great feel for her yet." Orochimaru's gaze fell back onto Kakashi, and his threatening smirk remained as he began strolling towards Kakashi and his 2 unconscious genin. "It doesn't really matter in the end. They'll all be under my thumb soon enough." A Rikiri flared to life in Kakashi's palm. "Don't you dare take another step. If you threaten my students, neither of us will leave this room." All he received was derisive laughter for his efforts. "What's so funny? Now, why would I threaten what's already mine?" was all Orochimaru said before he slowly turned around to return to the darkness. "They'll find their way to me in time. Sasuke is an Avenger, and Naruto will break free of the chain Sarutobi has him in eventually. They'll have nowhere else to turn to once the true stench of this village hits their nostrils." Then he stopped, but he did not turn to look back at Kakashi. "Oh, and that bit about neither of us leaving this room, well, here I am. Leaving. Aren't you going to stop me?" Kakashi did not move a muscle. The last encounter they had was nearly a decade prior, the day Orochimaru fled the village. He had a duty to stop him, but when a teenage Kakashi was finally face to face with Orochimaru of the Sannin, he was petrified. Orochimaru barely even spared him a glance back then, and he was still rooted in place, just like he was right now. "Just as I thought," Orochimaru chuckled. "Frozen, like a bitch. Like sensei, like precious pupil." Orochimaru slowly disappeared into the darkness, and Kakashi's soul nearly fell out of his body once he was gone. What the hell was he thinking challenging Orochimaru like that? The man never lifted both hands out of his pockets at once, and somehow, little all Kakashi Haddock was supposed to be a threat to him. What a joke. He sighed. He seriously needed to get back into top form. Zabuza shouldn't have been an issue for him, and he wouldn't have been had Kakashi not let his depression get the better of him and started slacking off. He was nowhere near the level he needed to be to keep his kid safe if monsters like Orochimaru had them in their sights, but that was going to change. It needed to change. Still, Kakashi would allow himself this singular moment's respite. Gazing at the 2 unconscious boys in the concrete, he idly wondered if Sakura had her match yet. He treasured the fact that at least one of his charges was somewhat well adjusted. "So, what, you think coming from an illustrious clan, being its heiress, and having parents that love you makes you better than me?" Sakura furiously shouted as she leveled Ino with brutal punch after punch, holding tightly to Ino's collar with her other hand to prevent her from escaping the onslaught. "No. Ino wailed while getting wailed on by her former best friend. Wrong answer. Naruto blearily peeled his eyes open when the shock of the ceiling finally wore off. Running a hand along his aching head, he noticed that his shirt and jacket were back on. About time you woke up, loser. Naruto turned to his right to see Sasuke sitting on the ground beside him, obviously still recovering his energy, as well. Before he could levy a joking insult back at him, a large hand ruffled his hair. Glad to see you're awake, Naruto, Kakashi remarked from behind, sending the two of them an eye smile. How are you feeling? Naruto took a moment to think about that. He felt around his body, and everything seemed to be in working order. Then, he felt around the seal and didn't notice anything that wasn't already present, nor did he find anything amiss with his chakra. Not very different, to be honest, he finally answered with a shrug. What's this containment thingy supposed to do anyway? It'll isolate the cursed seal and hopefully prevent it from forcefully imposing its will on you, Kakashi replied. Hopefully? Sasuke questioned with a quirked eyebrow, and even Naruto shared in his inquisition. Kakashi sheepishly scratched the back of his head. Well, the containment seal is less of a wall and more of a curtain. It functions entirely on your willpower to not use the cursed seal. So long as you don't peel back the curtain, you'll never get the compulsion to tap into its power. Out of sight, out of mind. Sasuke deadpanned at their nervously chuckling sensei. Seriously? Look, this was the best I could do, okay? Kakashi huffed, and both boys could tell that he was pouting under the mask. I'm nowhere near a Fuinjutsu expert, so I couldn't outright remove the cursed seals, no matter how badly I wanted to. Hell, I'm not sure that anyone short of my sensei could do it at this point. That bit of info grasped their attention, and it was Naruto who inevitably asked. Who was your sensei? A story for another time, Kakashi quickly dismissed before clapping his hands. Now, let's get back to the arena and check up on Sakura, shall we? Oh, right, I wonder how she did. Naruto exclaimed as he hopped to his feet and stretched the kinks out of his body. I hope she didn't go up against someone like Bushy Brows or Gaara. You seem concerned, Kakashi mused in curiosity. Naruto began, but he paused before looking towards Sasuke who was also looking at him quizzically. He gives me a really bad feeling. Sasuke took note of the quick glance Naruto shot him before he gave his vague response, but he opted not to speak up about it just yet. Instead, he simply sidled beside Kakashi so that they could be transported back to the arena. When they arrived, they flickered beside Sakura, causing her to jump in far more surprise than any of the trio thought necessary. Only moments later did they realize why, and they were not prepared for what they were greeted with upon their arrival. I'll kill you. A frothing Kurenai spat at a bleeding Neji while fighting her hardest both against the snakes coming out of Anko's sleeves and Asuma doing his very best to restrain her from the front. I'll rip your fucking eyes out of your skull, you repugnant piece of fucking garbage. Kurenai, you need to calm down. Asuma implored as he and Anko did everything in their power to keep any more genin from dying today. The object of her rage, Neji, was currently locked in Might Guy's tight grasp to prevent him from moving, both to keep him from doing anything stupid or aggravating the deep gash trailing along his brow. A little ways behind them were Ibiki holding an unconscious Kiba, Hayate holding a blade to Shino's throat, and the Hokage with his head in his hands. Then, looking back behind Anko was the clear precipice of all of this. There laid Hinata, dead as a doornail in a pool of her own blood. It looked like she had been mercilessly brutalized every which way, and it wasn't difficult to connect the dots as to who was responsible. Hinata, Naruto uttered in quiet shock. He hadn't had much of a relationship with her, or any relationship at all for that matter, in the academy, but she was one of the few people who were generally pleasant to him in the sparse interactions the two would have. To see her having been beaten and killed so brutally. What happened? Kakashi questioned a frazzled Sakura. Sakura took a moment to collect herself before answering. Hinata fought her cousin. Wait, her cousin? Naruto asked, his incredulity only growing exponentially, and Sakura nodded. Same guy? Sasuke asked, his eyes narrowing. Yeah, him, Sakura confirmed, knowing he was referring to their tense encounter in the Forest of Death. As the Hokage finally stood and approached the devolving situation, Kakashi took this chance to gather more info. Give us a rundown of what happened while we were gone. Sakura nodded. Well, right after you guys left, Rock Lee and Gaara fought. Gaara was insatiable, but Rock Lee pulled some really dangerous jutsu to battle him back. Guy-sensei called it the 8 inner gates. He used the 8 gates. Kakashi interrupted, aghast at the sheer audacity of the prospect. She confirmed. It sounded really dangerous, but he was pumping out so much chakra and moving so fast that I thought for sure that he was going to win. Did he? Naruto asked. No, Gaara crushed his limbs and crippled him, Sakura shot the thought down. Guy-sensei stepped in before it could go any further. Oh, what else happened? Kakashi pressed. Sakura stroked her chin. Well, I think that performance might have really upset Neji because he'd been festering in the corner since that match. The other boy from the Suna team killed Kabuto's other teammate with a puppet, Choji forfeited to Shikamaru, and the girl from Suna beat Tenten. She might have broken Tenten's back against her big fan, though. "And your match?" Kakashi questioned. Sakura immediately paled and shrank into herself. "Oh, I beat Ino, I guess." Kakashi quirked his visible eyebrow at her. "You don't sound too excited about that." "It's whatever," she shrugged, hoping to move on from the subject. She really didn't want to talk about how she nearly gave into the cursed seal's influence mid-fight. Ahem, Hayate loudly cleared his throat to get the room's attention. The floor had been cleared of Hinata's body, though not her blood, and Kurenai, Kiba, Niji, and Might Guy were now gone. Now, for the final bout. Shino Aburam vs Kabuto Yakushi. I forfeit. Kabuto wasted no time declaring from the other platform. Hayate blinked in surprise at the suddenness of the decision. Why? I don't really like my chances of survival against him in his current state, Kabuto responded, motioning to Shino already on the battlefield. The low buzzing emanating from beneath his coat was like a continuous death knell for all foolish enough to trifle with him. Meanwhile, he was projecting an aura of concentrated homicide so palpable that even Kisame Hashigek, the next country over, was compelled to pause and grin toward the horizon. Understandable, Hayate conceded. Winner by forfeit, Shino Aburam. Not a single word was uttered as Shino turned to leave the battlefield, but he was stopped by the voice of the Hokage. "Do not leave just yet, Shino," the Sandaime called out. "Now, the winners of each match, assemble on the field." Team 7, sent off with a proud thumbs up from Kakashi, descended the stairs and approached the Hokage and assembled proctors. True to Sakura's word, the Suna team and Shikamaru joined them and Shino on the arena floor, as well. Naruto's gaze was drawn to the Hokages once again, and he couldn't help but notice that while it was still analytical of him, it had softened minutely since his return with Kakashi. He didn't get much time to ruminate on that before a stone-faced Might Guy appeared alongside them with Niji noticeably absent. The thought of Niji brought a frown to Naruto's face, one that very quickly deepened into a downright venomous scowl. What kind of cold, twisted monster would murder their own family, especially someone as seemingly kind and non-threatening as Hinata? Sure, she was a little bit weird, but she didn't deserve to be put down like a fucking wild animal by her own fucking flesh and blood, no less. "Naruto," Sasuke curtly whispered, snagging his attention. "The hell's with your eyes? You have a Kekkei Genkai or something?" That shocked Naruto out of his deteriorating train of thought, and he shook off the red haze he was beginning to notice overtaking him. "Sorry, just deep in thought." "What did they look like?" "They were red, and your pupils were slitted," Sasuke carefully replied. "Just like in the forest when we fought Orochimaru." That was exactly what Naruto feared, but he couldn't yet let Sasuke in on the secret that somehow only he and the rest of the people his age were unaware of. He wasn't ready. "Yeah, they do that sometimes," Naruto evasively responded. "It's something I've had since birth." Sasuke merely shot him a deadpan look at the horrendously obvious evasion, but he wouldn't push the issue. He could wring it out of him after these formalities were settled. "Whatever it is, my Sharingan is better," Sasuke dismissed with a smirk as a box was held in front of him for him to draw a lot. "Bite me," Naruto huffed as he drew a number as well, and then Might Guy did the same. "Now, one by one, please state the number you drew," Hayate instructed. 8, Gaara spoke up from the other end of the mine. 6, Temari said from beside him. 3, Kankuro followed up. 2, Shino curtly stated. "What a drag," Shikamaru sighed. 1, 7, Sakura said next. 4, Sasuke answered. 9, said Naruto. 5, Might Guy rounded them off. Then, Anko spoke into a headset and a tournament bracket appeared on the screen. Hayate cleared his throat again. The bracket is as follows. Match 1 is Shino Aburam vs Kankuro, Match 2 is Sasuke Uchiha vs Niji Hyuga, Match 3 is Temari vs Sakura Haruno, and Match 4 is Gaara vs Naruto Uzumaki. Shikamaru Nara receives a bye and will face the winner of Match 1 at the end of the first round. Hayate then turned to the Sandaime. "They're all yours, Lord Hokage." "Excellent," he nodded. "I shall begin explaining the final round of the Chunin exams." "Hey Kyuubi. What is it about Gaara that riles the Jupi up?" Naruto heard a deep hum rumble through his mind before the fox spoke. "If I had to guess, I'd say that it is because that boy is a Jinchuriki like you, and the Jubi is sensing another Biju's chakra that it wishes to consume and assimilate." Naruto was taken aback for the umpteenth time that day by that revelation. He knew something was really off about him, but he certainly wasn't expecting that. "Wait, seriously? Which one?" "The Ichibi. The smell of bitch permeates through that boy, and I only know of one creature who smells of bitch so strongly. I don't really know how to respond to that. Simply be grateful that you were bestowed the honor to contain the power of the mightiest entity in existence. Bask in my glory, human." "Well then, good work, all." The Sandaime congratulated in conclusion. "You are all dismissed until 1 month from now." The collection of genin began to disperse and Team 7 made to rendezvous with their sensei. However, they were stopped when Gaara appeared before them, or rather, he appeared before Naruto. Uzumaki, Gaara coldly addressed, sending a faint shiver up both Naruto and Sakura's spines. I don't know why mother is so afraid of you, but I'm going to enjoy tearing you limb from limb and gifting her your blood. Make our bout entertaining, I want to feel alive. Without further preamble, he turned and walked away with his two teammates scrambling in tow. Temari briefly turned and shot Naruto a pitiful glance before she continued on her way toward their own sensei. That guy is seriously freaky, Sakura shuddered. Do you think you can beat him? I don't know, Naruto admitted, his gaze casting downward before his hand hovered above his abdomen. Maybe if. No, Sasuke emphatically denied, snatching Naruto's wrist into his grasp. If you're about to say what I think you are, then forget it. We will be better than resorting to that. Naruto squinted in confusion until he finally caught up to what Sasuke had assumed he was referring to, and he blanched. What? No, that's not what I meant. There's no way in hell I'm using that. I meant. He trailed off, wilting under the expectant looks of both Sasuke and Sakura. Something else, he lamely finished. But it is something. Sakura probed. The weary sigh that Naruto unleashed took both of his teammates aback. Naruto knew that the secret would come out at some point, if not by him, someone else in the know with malicious intentions would spill the beans to them, sorta like Mizuki had. He didn't know who in the village he could trust anymore after their encounter with Orochimaru. He didn't know if he could even trust anyone. Well, perhaps there were two people he could. Would you two come with me to my apartment? Naruto finally asked in a voice far too small for Sasuke and Sakura's comfort. I'll tell you guys everything. Not here, though. Of course, Sakura quickly assured, placing a hand on his shoulder in support. You can tell us anything you need. We're always here for you and each other, right, Sasuke? Sasuke looked away, wanting no business with this overt display of sharing vulnerability. Sakura would have none of it, right, Sasuke? She growled, snatching his ear into her iron grip and wrenching his head downward. God damn it, ow. Sasuke yelped. Fine, whatever. We're here for you, loser. Sakura beamed, and a smile broke through Naruto's unnatural show of diffidence. Thanks, guys, Naruto said, flecks of his familiar bluster returning. I'll pick you guys up some instant ramen on the way. Sakura giggled and followed behind Naruto as he made his way to the exit, and Sasuke grumbled about him choosing the snacks next time before meandering after them. All the while, Kakashi watched the scene from atop the viewing platform with an unseen smile. Ignoring the storm clouds hovering over them, it was fantastic to see them truly bonding into a real team. Unfortunately, ignoring those storm clouds was simply wishful thinking and a recipe for disaster. Kakashi, Anko called out to him as she approached, also gazing at the three genin depart the arena into the unending expanse of the tower. Anko, he addressed, already knowing what this would be about. What are you planning on doing with your brats? She asked, getting straight to the point. I plan on taking the three of them out into the wilderness and training them into the ground for the month, he lightly responded. You know that's not what I meant, she said with a scowl. No, I know exactly what you meant, Kakashi countered. It keeps them out of the village and away from Orochimaru or any other potentially prying eyes. Anko didn't need him to elaborate on that. She had a few Anbu watching her when she was initially brought back to the village after Orochimaru abandoned her. While she became familiar with a few of them, she did always notice one or two strangely blank signatures that typically stayed nearly out of reach of her senses. Kakashi's scant recounts of his brief time working under Danzo silently confirmed her suspicions. You think they'll have more eyes on them than just Orochimaru? She asked. Maybe not all of them, but definitely Naruto in particular, Kakashi grimly replied. A Jinchuriki with a cursed seal is going to have some people asking uncomfortable questions I'm going to do my best to shield them from. Right, Anko sighed. Kid has it hard enough already. He doesn't need this, too. She brought her gaze back up to Kakashi. So, how are you planning on training them? They each have kinks that need to be ironed out before they can go any further, some more than others, Kakashi began. I'm going to address those, then refine their physical capabilities and taijutsu before immersing them into elemental ninjutsu. Anko quirked an eyebrow at him. You sure you're gonna be able to handle all of that on your own? Whether I can or not is irrelevant at this point, Kakashi shrugged. They need to be ready for whatever is to come, far more ready than they are right now. True, she conceded the point, but she wasn't entirely convinced. Still, won't you be divvying yourself up too much to properly focus on the three of them? Their opponents aren't pushovers even if they're still punk-ass genin, and your team is. For a brief moment, Kakashi thought that Anko was going to spare him her unfiltered opinion about his team, and he internally sighed. Really fucking ass as they are right now, she finished. Kakashi thought wrong, it seemed. Granted, they're not as putrid as some of the other genin, but come on, she continued, ignoring Kakashi's growing slump. It's pretty clear that the formula was last Uchiha, walking nuke, and a no-name straggler to round out the bunch. Individually, any competent genin with more experience than them would probably tear them apart. I'm well aware, Kakashi muttered from his spot on the ground with his knees to his chest and a rain cloud overhead. Oh, quit your damn crying, she exasperatedly sighed before hoisting him back to his feet and smacking him a few good times. Look, I'm just leveling with you. If you're gonna turn these brats into world beaters, you're gonna need help. Kakashi immediately perked up at that. Why, Anko, are you extending your services in training my cute little genin for the finals? Anko immediately opened her mouth to shoot the thought down, but she paused, considered the thought, and slowly closed her mouth. She scowled to the side before sighing in concession. I guess someone should be there to guide those two idiots of yours in resisting the cursed seal when it's still fresh. Keeping it at bay while using large portions of your chakra isn't as simple as it sounds. Bree, Kakashi corrected. Anko blinked. Come again. He marked all three of them with a cursed seal, apparently, Kakashi casually reiterated. He told me so himself after I placed containment seals on Naruto and Sasuke. Anko's brown, pupil-less gaze bore through Kakashi with so much incredulity that a passing observer would assume that Kakashi had threatened to cut her off from Dango. And you just fucking let them wander on their own? She finally snapped in alarm. Of course not, Kakashi waved off her concern. I'm just a shadow clone. The real me is breaking into Naruto's apartment ahead of them as we speak. Anko's skeptical glare was soon followed by a kunai flying out of her sleeve and slamming into Kakashi's gut. The kunai hitting a non-vital area didn't matter, as Kakashi popped into a cloud half smoke. That son of a bitch. The silence within Naruto's apartment was suffocating to our blonde doofus. He anxiously sat in a chair in his living room, twiddling his thumbs and staring at the floorboards, as Sasuke and Sakura sat on the couch in front of him. 4 empty cups of instant ramen sit discarded around him in his earlier fruitless attempt to stall. He needed to just come right out with it, and that's exactly what he did eventually. So, let me get this straight, Sasuke finally broke the silence, placing his empty cup of ramen down to steeple his fingers in thought. The Kyuubi, the giant, monstrously powerful creature of legend that stomped a mud hole into the village when we were babies, wasn't actually killed by the Yondaime like we were constantly told, but it was instead sealed inside of you? Yeah, Naruto sighed, his expression darkening ever so slightly. I was the precious sacrifice that night. The apartment was silent again as Sasuke considered the new information and the many implications it carried. Then, he brought his onyx eyes up to meet Naruto's cerulean once more. Is that where the whiskers come from? Naruto began before his annoyed squawk died in his throat. He had to stop and genuinely consider the question that he had never truly thought all that hard about. Maybe. Then, he vigorously shook his head, casting the distraction away. Hold on, that's your takeaway from all this? Sasuke shrugged. Well, it's obvious that this is why the villagers treat you the way they do, so it seemed pointless to ask. Naruto wanted to rebut, but he was again struck silent and forced to concede the point. Whatever. Sasuke took the victory and turned to Sakura. You haven't said anything at all. I'm surprised you're not freaking out about everything. I might have already known, Sakura sheepishly admitted. Sasuke and Sakura could have sworn that the sound of something falling to the ground and a muffled shit echoed from somewhere within the apartment, but Naruto ignored that completely as he hopped to his feet. You knew? He nearly shouted. Orochimaru let some info slip in the forest, she nervously explained, a bit of shame entering her expression as she minutely retreated inward. Why didn't you say anything? Naruto demanded. Suddenly, a bout of conviction erupted from Sakura's core and she met Naruto's gaze directly with a resolute expression. Because it was your secret to tell, and I didn't want to bring it up if you weren't ready to talk about it yet. Unseen was the mild pulsing of the cursed seal of earth, hidden under the neck of her kippao, reacting to her instinctual distress. Cursed seal or not, however, the point was solid enough to pacify Naruto. In fact, more than just pacifying, it struck Naruto deeply in a manner he simply wasn't prepared for. He went into this endeavor with a healthy amount of dread that the only two people he might be able to trust would totally reject him once they learned the truth about him. Not only was that not the case, but one of his teammates was already aware and cared enough for him to wait for him to cross that bridge at his own pace. It filled him with a sort of warmth that he had only ever felt when he was given his very first hot meal at Ichiraku and when he was presented with his headband after the Forbidden Scroll incident. Thank you, he genuinely choked out, doing his best to strangle any tears that were chomping at the bit to spill. Of course, Naruto, Sakura replied, standing up to wrap him in a hug. Like I said, we're always going to be there for each other. For Naruto, this was wonderful. This was exactly what he needed. Now, he knew who he could trust implicitly. It warms my heart to see you all genuinely bonding, an adult voice from the hallway intoned, immediately capturing the attention of the three. Right as Sasuke activated his Sharingan and produced a handful of shuriken, out stepped their sensei shooting them an innocuous eye smile. Yo, Kakashi greeted, completely ignoring his students falling to the ground in shock at his sudden appearance. Kakashi sensei. Sakura balked when she regained her bearings. When the hell did you get here? How the hell did you get in here? Naruto followed up. I broke in shortly before you all arrived, he gladly answered with a carefree tone. Picking a lock is child's play for a seasoned jonin like myself, as is disabling all of the tripwires and explosive tags you have set up as a security system. Great selection by the way, Naruto, but I'd spring for something that would cause a touch less property damage to the other units of this building. While Naruto filed that info away for later, it was Sasuke's turn to question him. Why did you break in? And why were you eavesdropping on our conversation when you could have just come out at any moment? To make a point, Kakashi answered, his tone losing its joviality and growing serious. Anyone of my caliber or higher could have broken in and gotten the drop on you at any time, and you wouldn't have been able to do a thing about it. That's a problem, one that you cannot afford to have with someone like Orochimaru setting their sights on you. That revelation made the three grow just as serious as their sensei, he was right. If he was a hostile invader, he could have killed them all before they even knew what hit them. Hell, Orochimaru could have done just that in the forest if that was his goal. I'd rather not waste any time, Kakashi continued. We have a month to train you three into top form for the final round of the Chunin exams, and I intend to see that happen. You're training all of us for the finals? Naruto asked, the only one of the three able to speak through their surprise. That's the plan, Kakashi confirmed. I can freely admit that I've been far too lax with you three in regard to prepping you for the darkness of the shinobi world, and that ends now. First thing tomorrow morning, we're going on a training trip, hopefully the first of many more to follow in the future. Wait, so, like proper training? Naruto questioned. Like crazy jutsu and stuff, not just tree walking and teamwork. Yes, Naruto, proper training, Kakashi confirmed, opting to keep the explanation simple for the moment. I don't think you all need any more help in teamwork, which is good if you all want to be a force to be reckoned with sooner rather than later. Before they could digest that, Kakashi switched gears. Now, tell me everything that happened in the Forest of Death. Where are we going? Naruto asked Kakashi as he silently led his team through the dense forest surrounding the bounds of Konoha. Somewhere remote, he responded without looking back at them. A place we won't be bothered. A place we won't be found. Naturally, that response did nothing to assuage the worries of the three genin in his care. In fact, it only made them warier, which they were certain that Kakashi took note of. They had all been wary ever since they explained what happened in the Forest of Death, minus the specifics about what Naruto's cursed seal actually entailed, of course, but none more than Naruto. He had always had inklings that he was being watched growing up, but the feeling felt exponentially stronger ever since he left the tower, and their sensei breaking into his home and eavesdropping on their conversation did not inspire a ton of confidence about his already low standing in the village. How do we know you aren't taking us into the wilderness to murder us discreetly? Sakura was the one to vocalize their shared thoughts. On the surface, the question seemed like a dark but ultimately innocuous joke. Why would I waste energy taking you out of the village for that? Killing you three inside Naruto's apartment and ensuring your bodies were never to be found would be child's play. Kakashi's tongue-in-cheek yet surprisingly blunt rebuke of Sakura's actual question hidden underneath the underneath was most likely intended to help clear the air about the reality of their situation without coddling them, or at least that's what Sakura figured. However, her unflinchingly stony countenance and the pointed gazes of both Sasuke and Naruto made it evident that he hadn't really succeeded in inspiring much trust, and his slight downcast sigh was indication enough that the message was received. So Naruto drawled, breaking the mildly tense silence before it could fester. Where are we going? Our matches are individual, Sasuke spoke up, ignoring Naruto's question entirely. There's no way that you'll be able to devote enough singular attention to each of us. Are you planning for us to go into the finals knowing all that we can do? Thankful for the deviation in subject matter, Kakashi hummed with a stroke of his chin. That is the conundrum, isn't it? Faster than anyone could blink, three kunai shot out of the trees behind them and nicked each one of them on the cheek. While Sasuke and Sakura were startled, Naruto was already having flashbacks to just before the second exam began. Refusing to be licked again, he whipped around with his hands locked and loaded in a cross to make shadow clones at a moment's notice, and his teammates weren't far behind him with kunai in hand. Your kids are jumpy, Kakashi, a voice from above remarked before a familiar figure in a trench coat dropped to the forest floor in front of them. They're still too slow, though. Stay away from me, you pervy psycho. Naruto demanded. Aw, you remember me, she gushed, flickering behind Naruto once again and trapping him in her arms. Your blood tasted really nice last time. I couldn't help but get another fix. While Naruto struggled to wriggle out of her grasp, a long-suffering sigh dragged itself out of Kakashi after he facepalmed. Not the way I wanted to properly introduce you all, but I suppose now is as good a time as any. You've all met Anko, right? Sasuke and Sakura hesitantly nodded as Naruto finally fished himself out of her clutches and scuttled away, eventually putting Sasuke in between himself and Anko's victorious grin. How did she know where we were going to be if no one was supposed to find us? Sakura questioned. I've been following you all the whole time, Anko casually dismissed, drawing surprised expressions from all three of them. Tracking is one of my specialties. I didn't hear her at all, Naruto muttered. She's good. Why is she here? Sasuke asked. Rather than respond verbally, Anko stepped forward and pulled back the collar of her trench coat to expose her collarbone, showcasing her cursed seal of heaven to them in all its glory. Sakura gasped while Sasuke immediately tensed and his hand subconsciously traveled to his own mark. I'm intimately familiar with your situations, Anko lowly remarked, readjusting her collar. Kakashi asked me to come help you brats train for the finals because I'm uniquely qualified to teach you how to function with one of these. How so? Sasuke asked. Remember when you fought back the mark during your fight in the preliminaries? She asked, and Sasuke nodded. You were low on chakra and without a containment seal, the mark will brute force its chakra through you to fill the void when you start to run your reserves dry. I give you props for beating it back regardless, kid. So, with the containment seal, we won't have to worry about that. Sakura asked with a flicker of hope that her newly installed containment seal would eliminate any issues. No, you still do, Anko denied, shooting her hopes out of the sky before they could even get anywhere. Orochimaru wouldn't craft a cursed seal that can be subdued by a simple containment seal. All it does is raise the threshold for how low your reserves have to be for the mark to attack, but the mark still can attack. The containment seal isn't going to stop the whispers, either. It's only as strong as your willpower to not use the mark. So, if you know how to operate at full capacity without running the risk of entering that threshold, you won't ever think about having to tap into that power. She grinned and thumbed at herself. That's what I'm here for. You brats are gonna learn how to not be wasteful with your chakra and how to maximize your output relative to your use. Who better to do it than two chakra powerhouses and a maestro at chakra control, at least according to Kakashi. Sakura was floored, and even Sasuke had to admit that he was interested in everything both she and Kakashi could teach if Kakashi's earlier statement about training them into the ground held true. Naruto, meanwhile, had lost himself in thought upon seeing the curse mark. He remembered the empathy in her gaze when she looked at him, as fleeting as it may have been. At least now he knew why. Still, receiving any amount of empathy from someone in Konoha was a depressingly infrequent occurrence, and he wasn't going to just dismiss that. I'm in, Naruto suddenly spoke up with a resolute expression. His teammates weren't expecting him to so quickly be on board after he blatantly made his aversion to her known, but his sureness compelled them to nod their assent. They were ready for whatever the two adults had to throw at them. Fantastic. Anko cheered, appearing behind Naruto in a flash and trapping him in her arms once again. We're gonna have so much fun this month, aren't we, Foxy? I need an adult, Naruto squeaked, and Sakura at least attempted to stifle her laughter. I am an adult, Anko replied with a grin. Highly debatable, Kakashi smoothly added his 2 cents. Suck my ass, Scarecrow. Unseen to the group as they continued onward to the area Kakashi had sequestered for them, a small toad poked its head out of a nearby bush and watched them retreat before vanishing in a puff of smoke. Head up. Sweat droplets plopped to the floor of the dojo as Neji struggled to push himself up on all fours. His muscles were screaming in protest, his bones were crying for respite, and his pride had taken a beating so savage that not even the sage of 6 paths himself could restore his dignity. On your feet, boy. Hiashi demanded. Neji heaved a sigh, which was a mistake as his ribs could barely take any more punishment. Still, he fought through the torment and finally climbed back to his feet, re-entering the beginning stance of the gentle fist. Hiashi did not allow him a single picosecond to gather himself before he struck with violent fury, laying waste to Neji in a brutal, unrelenting series of strikes. He shut down chakra points, slammed into pressure points, and all around beat Neji senseless like he had been for the last 10 minutes. A final open palm to his chest launched Neji backward, sending him rolling across the dojo into a sweaty coughing heap. You disgrace your father's memory, Hiashi growled as he stepped toward his downed nephew. You spit on his sacrifice so cavalierly, and for what? Petty resentment and misplaced anger. On the ground, Neji was shaking and his skin was growing hot. His fingernails dug into the floor as his vision slowly grew unfocused. His pain had completely left his mind at the utterance of one single word out of the mouth of the clan's patriarch. Sacrifice. Do you have something you wish to say? Hiashi asked in a low, cold tone. The unspoken threat snapped Neji out of his descent and refocused his senses. He shook his head. This was no place to die. Get out of my sight, Hiashi ordered. Neji once again struggled back to his feet as best as he could, and then he limped towards the door while clutching his abdomen despite his entire body feeling like one giant bruise. Once the entrance to the dojo had slid closed behind him, he began his slow, embarrassing trek back to his quarters in silence. Everyone he passed along the way, both main house Hyuga and branch house servants alike, pointedly avoided his gaze. He had quietly become persona non grata among the compound, as even if the branch house weren't fans of the main house and his cousin by extension, openly showing support for a branch house member after he had slain a main house Hyuga was suicide. Niji was no fool. He knew that the only reason he was still alive was because of his familial ties. He knew that Hiashi had pulled his punches, even if only just so much, to avoid killing him outright. He knew that Hiashi and the clan elders were likely still deliberating on exactly what to do with him. He so dearly wished that they'd simply kill him already and get it over with. Death was preferable to whatever existence he had left. As he turned the corner into the hallway where his quarters were, he was met with a sight that opened the pit of his stomach into a sinkhole. Standing in front of the door was the former patriarch of the clan and Hiashi's father, Hinam Hyuga. Be grateful that it was only the failure that was slain at your hand, he gruffly addressed with none of the warmth that his namesake alluded to. Your use to this clan is null, now that you have proven yourself to be a mad dog. Niji felt the white-hot rage in his core burn once again, but he clenched his teeth and kept his mouth shut. However, Hinam continued stonily, your combat prowess and proficiency over our clan's taijutsu speaks for itself. You have advanced to the finals of the Chunin exams. Hinam stepped forward and pinned Niji to his spot with a cold glare. You will not only defeat the Uchiha Saiyan, you will embarrass him. You will demonstrate the unending might of the Hyuga and perhaps you may get to keep your miserable life. Should you fail. With a single hand sign, Niji's caged bird seal activated and he crumpled to the floor with a vicious guttural wail of agony. Searing pain lanced through his brain and radiated like a spiderweb of excruciating torment, catching him in its trap and bundling him in a nightmarish cocoon as he waited to be swallowed up by the dispassionate embrace of brain death. Then, in a single moment, it was over. The seal etched into his forehead was deactivated and the pain had vanished. He was left writhing on the floor to slowly regain his bearings as his grandfather stared down at him without an ounce of pity. Are we clear? Hinam asked, and he waited for Niji to bring his head up to look him in the eye with nothing but hatred. Crystal, Niji gritted out with enough venom to take down the entire village. Come on, I know you can do better than that. Anko joyfully called out to the downed genin in front of her. Why did I agree to this? Sakura moaned from her place on the ground, slowly pushing her achy body up to a sitting position. What's the point of this? I can't land a hit on you. True, Anko hummed before tossing Sakura a water bottle. But you also haven't been getting tagged every single time. Your reflexes and flexibility are definitely up to par, even if your raw taijutsu ability is mediocre at best. That's honestly more generous of an analysis than I expected, Sakura remarked after taking a swig of water. I'm not particularly strong like some of the guys in my graduating class, and I'm definitely not the fighter that Hinata she faltered when the memory of Hinata's battered body at the hands of her cousin flashed in her mind and a deep shudder came over her. Should finally becoming real for you? Anko asked, placing her hands in the pockets of her coat. The long, silent moment passed before Sakura finally opened her mouth to respond. It's been real for me since Nami, and if it wasn't, Orochimaru made sure that it was. It's just seeing a comrade killed in the flesh is new for you, Anko surmised. By her own flesh and blood. Sakura shouted. He didn't even give her a chance. You could see in her eyes that she didn't even want to fight him, but as soon as the match started, he just pounced and wouldn't stop until Kurenai-sensei nearly took his head off. Yeah, Anko sighed. It was rough. That's the life we chose, though. It can end or be turned upside down at any time by anyone, so it pays to keep your head on a swivel, be ready for anything, and be careful about who you place your trust in. Sakura gazed at her when she said this, and her eyes briefly lowered to Anko's collar. It wasn't particularly difficult to piece together what she meant and why she would say that given what they knew about her and the fact that it was far more applicable than Anko probably even considered based on what Orochimaru revealed to her, and Naruto only added to Sakura's growing exhaustion. The sounds of many Narutos cheering in the distance as he worked on his wind nature with Kakashi and the sight of a much larger than average firebolt blasting into the sky brought her wandering mind to her teammates. Comparatively, they had much tougher battles ahead than she did and they were immersing themselves in non-stop training without a second thought. Meanwhile, she had more holes in her skillset to fill, so she'd have more ground to cover and less time to do it. A long, weary huff escaped her. Monsters like him and Gaara are the kind that we'll have to be on the level of, which is why we don't have any time to waste, Anko said, extending her hand to lift Sakura to her feet. I can tell that you've got a lot to prove, so let's build you up into someone who can do just that, huh? Taking the offered hand and getting back to her feet, Sakura dusted herself off and took on a determined expression. Alright guys, we almost had it before, so let's try this one last time. Naruto shouted to the gaggle of clones surrounding one side of a pointed boulder, each with both hands firmly planted on the stone. Right. Chorused the clones. On three. Naruto directed. 1, 2, 3. They all said in unison, and a collective blade of wind shot through the boulder and sliced it in two, the force of the blade even making the boulder jump an inch off of the ground. The gaggle of Narutos erupted into cheers and celebrated by jumping victoriously around the now unsteady boulder. The vibrations of the merriment caused the pointed top half of said boulder to slowly slide off entirely, smashing point first into the cranium of an unsuspecting clone and dispelling it into a puff of smoke. The sudden death of a brother paused the merriment, and the original Naruto winced as the memory of getting brained by a jagged stone entered his mind. Wait, what? Naruto spoke up in confusion. Why do I remember it as if it happened to me and not a clone? Unless Naruto produced a kunai and threw it at the nearest clone, fright and betrayal being the last thing it felt before the kunai slammed between its eyes and dispelled it. Shortly thereafter, the memory of a kunai darting toward him accompanied by the phantom sensation of being stabbed in the face came over him and he lit up in excitement. The other clones, sensing imminent danger, quickly dispelled themselves at once. Holy shit, I get the memories of my shadow clones. Naruto exclaimed before stumbling at the slight ache caused by all of the memories of his clones rushing back to him at once. You didn't already know that? Kakashi, or rather his clone that was overseeing Naruto training his wind nature, asked as he stepped forward. Naruto blinked away the remaining disarray before sheepishly scratching the back of his head. I guess I hadn't really put a ton of thought into it. Most of the time, it's just a mess of images that sorta just blend into what I'm already seeing. Naruto paused when something else occurred to him. Wait, if I get back what my clones experience, that means I can have them do other things for me, and I'll still retain all that knowledge, right? Kakashi nodded. The Shadow Clone Jutsu's original purpose was information gathering. It's just that most people can't make very many if any at all, so its uses were effectively limited. You don't have that issue, though. I can make as many as I want, Naruto nodded in confirmation, and then he began thinking once more. Come to think of it, I noticed that when I made more clones, I started to figure out how to properly mold my chakra into wind a lot faster. Naruto fell into a thoughtful silence as he pondered the ramifications of that discovery. Kakashi remained silent as well, allowing Naruto to come to the conclusion he knew he was just on the brink of himself. Half of getting stronger was training your mind alongside your body, after all. Then, Naruto lit up once again and he faced Kakashi with bright eyes. I can use them to speed up training. Kakashi smiled and nodded in confirmation. Yes, you can. I was actually going to introduce the concept to you once you got this down. Since memories and experiences carry over, chakra control and manipulation exercises can be done however many times over at once, whereas physical training won't transfer. You'll have to train your real body for that. Then let's get started. Naruto declared, pounding his fist into his palm. What's next? Sasuke dashed away from the spot where a deluge of kunai and shuriken impacted mere milliseconds later, parrying an incoming shower of more metallic death with kunai in both hands all the while. He no longer kept track of exactly how long he'd been moving, only that it had been non-stop. He needed to grow a lot faster than he currently was, as his scuffle with Rock Lee so graciously reminded him. His Sharingan was useless if he couldn't react fast enough to do anything about the attacks he perceived, so Kakashi was running him ragged to improve his linear speed, reaction speed, and agility in one fell swoop. If the narrowly dodged shuriken, tento, mace, nunchucks, and inexplicable anvil that nearly flattened him were any indication, he was making decent progress. Now, all he had to do was continue wading through the hailstorm of kunai being lobbed at him from every which way to finally catch and maim the masked bastard, who was doing everything he could to skewer him. With a hearty dash, he was finally within crisping range of his sensei. A few quick hand seals later, a ridiculously large, needlessly bright ball of fire rocketed out of his mouth and carved through the landscape and the incoming weapons, clearing a path for him to finally tag Kakashi. He'd definitely thank Anko for the tip about maximizing chakra output while minimizing expenditure. It was crazy just how much chakra he was wasting by, well, brute-forcing jutsu. That's the way he'd been doing it since he was practicing the Grand Fireball as a child, and pretty soon after that, no one was around to correct him. Just as that thought crossed his mind, he jerked out of the way of a katana that was primed to impale him like a javelin, and he watched Kakashi shoot him a peace sign before flickering away once again. Seriously, where the hell did he even get all these weapons, and where the hell was he stashing them? Back in the little weapons shop in Konoha, Tenten's maniacal laughter echoed through the building as she gingerly counted wads of cash behind the counter, careful not to aggravate her injured back any further. The night was still, and the only sensation Gaara could feel was the gentle breeze sliding across the village as he sat on the roof of the hotel they were staying in. The full moon illuminated the night sky, but something was wrong. Gaara felt none of the usual stirring, agitation, or excitement from his demon that usually bubbled when the full moon was out. The void inside of him was unnaturally silent, and that silence was eating away at him. He had become so used to the constant screaming for blood and viscera that the absence of it was somehow even more maddening. Why had Mother gone silent? Why was she ignoring him? She had begun acting strangely ever since that odd dreadful aura bore down on the forest of death, and every time he looked at Naruto Uzumaki, Mother would panic and violently command him to stay away from him. Gaara never imagined that it was possible for Mother to be genuinely frightened by something, but the fact that something, or someone, was capable of that intrigued him. What was it about Uzumaki that frightened Mother so? Hey, kid. Gaara blinked, taken by surprise by the sudden communication. Yes, Mother. If you never listen to anything I say ever again, just hear me out this one last time. Do not fight that blonde kid. Gaara furrowed his brow. Why not? That kid has a truly horrible creature inside of him. Now, Gaara was even more intrigued. He's like me. Worse. He's got something inside of him that's older than even me. And that something wants to fucking eat me. I don't understand. That creature inside of him is a horrible monstrosity that's more dangerous than anything you have ever encountered or ever will. It's stronger than you. It's stronger than me. Hell, it's stronger than the strongest version of me. Gaara was floored, unable to fathom the shockingly coherent ramblings echoing within him. Stronger than. Listen, brat, if you fight him, I will die, and I will not allow you to get me killed, damn it. Stronger than, Gaara mumbled, his mind spiraling into a storm of denial, uncertainty, incredulity, and confusion. Mother had always commanded him to kill. She had always commanded him to feed her the blood of the weak. She had always reveled in him exercising dominance, taking the lives of others to showcase his own and prove that he was the strongest. Now, she was saying that there was someone stronger. There was someone with a demon stronger than even her. There was someone who could kill not only him, but he could kill Mother as well. It was impossible. It was asinine. It was perfect, Gaara rasped, a crazed face-splitting grin coming over him. Yes, yes. Killing Uzumaki will prove my existence like no other. With his blood, I will be forever undeniable. No one will ever be able to challenge me. As Gaara descended into a haunting, maniacal fit of laughter, the Biju inside of him genuinely facepalmed. If shit goes sideways, I'm freeing myself from this seal the first chance I get and hightailing it the fuck outta here. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura had stopped counting the weeks that they had been in isolation with Kakashi and Anko. Their sensei had made good on his promise to train them into the ground, and they certainly looked the part with their torn, muddy clothes and an assortment of bruises on every inch of their bodies. And yet, none of them would have it any other way. They had grown more in this single period than they had since graduation, and the results would speak for themselves soon enough. Alright, you three, front and center, Kakashi called to them, and the three quickly complied, standing at attention before a smiling Kakashi and smirking Anko. It's time you reach the culmination of what you three have each been working towards, Kakashi began, and he had their rapt attention. Naruto, your chakra control has advanced enough for you to try out this neat little jutsu my sensei created. Naruto furrowed his brow, as did Sakura and Sasuke as Kakashi opened his palm and grabbed his wrist. The concentration was visible on his face, sparking even more interest in the genin at what this jutsu could possibly entail. Soon, their questions were answered when visible chakra began to coalesce into a ball in his palm. The frantic sounds of several thousands of strands of chakra spinning in all directions within that ball filled the clearing, growing even more wild as the ball grew in size until it was about as large as his palm. This is the Rasengan, one of the signature jutsu of the Yondaime, Kakashi said. Holy hell, Naruto exhaled in awe of the jutsu. Despite his recent increasingly complicated feelings about the Yondaime and the village as a whole, he had to give credit to an awesome jutsu when he saw one. What does it do, exactly? Sasuke asked. As far as he could tell, there were no chakra natures anywhere in the jutsu. Observe, Kakashi instructed, and then he turned and drove the Rasengan into a nearby boulder, grinding a deep crater into it until it exploded out the other side, blasting chunks of stone in all directions. It does that. Awesome. Naruto cheered, practically salivating to begin working on it. Could I add my wind chakra to it? I'm glad you asked, Kakashi smiled. The Rasengan is actually an incomplete jutsu. It's the pinnacle of shape manipulation, as you noticed, there is no nature transformation involved. The Yondaime never got around to adding any natures to it before he died, and I've never been able to regardless of how hard I tried. In fact, the jutsu I have for Sasuke is a direct result of one of those attempts. Now, Sasuke was even more interested, especially once Kakashi lifted his headband to expose his implanted Sharingan. They watched him run through a series of hand seals before lightning crackled in his open palm and began frantically spilling out. The three genin were transfixed by the sight, and Sakura quickly remembered the sounds of birds chirping from the battle at the bridge in Nami. This is the Chidori, Kakashi continued. While I wasn't able to add lightning to the Rasengan, I was able to wield pure lightning chakra in my hand. It comes with a few caveats, though. Right as he finished, he vanished from his spot and slammed his fist into another boulder on the other side of the clearing within moments, stabbing right through it like hot butter. Jerking his arm out of the rock, he faced his students once again. The immense boost in speed that using the Chidori grants will cause tunnel vision between you and your target, eliminating your ability to see any potential dangers coming from either side of you. The only thing that can mitigate this is the Sharingan, which is why only Sasuke among you can safely use this jutsu. Sasuke nodded, not even bothering to hide his smirk from Naruto. Naruto couldn't even be upset about it, as he was perfectly content with being given the Rasengan to learn. That only left Sakura. What about me, Kakashi-sensei? Sakura spoke up and Kakashi sighed. Unfortunately, you are one of a breed of special cases whose chakra is naturally in tune with two natures without a verifiable elemental Kekkei Genkai, Kakashi began, but he continued before Sakura could deflate. As it happens, I don't have any water or earth jutsu that are as potent as the Chidori or the Rasengan. Which is where I come in, Anko picked up, earning Sakura's full attention. I've got a jutsu for you that will work nicely in your fight with the wind girl from Suna. The only hurdle is that it's a fire jutsu, and a really high level one at that. Learning it means developing your ability to mold fire nature chakra from the ground up while fighting against the other chakra's natural behavior. You game for it? Absolutely, Sakura nodded with nothing but determination. Excellent, Anko grinned. Fortunately, since your water nature is already fighting against your earth nature to simply exist, you should have a good bit of experience with dueling natures, so this shouldn't take very long for you to get the hang of. She stood back and turned to a third, undisturbed rock formation. I created the jutsu myself, so you won't get pointers for this anywhere else. Watch and learn. But the surprisingly short sequence that was bookended by the tiger seal, Anko puckered her lips and spat what looked to be a lightning-fast ultra-thin senbon that was glowing red-hot. Then, it impacted the rock formation and erupted into a gargantuan fireball that Sakura was woefully unprepared for, as were Sasuke and Naruto, since all three of them were knocked on their asses by the surprising force of the eruption. The flames reflected in Anko's manic gaze, illuminating the clearing in a malevolent orange glow. At least, that was the case until a water trumpet blasted the impromptu bonfire and doused the flames. I think you've had your fun, Anko, Kakashi casually chided, causing her to huff and cross her arms. Fucking party pooper, she grumbled. Alright, you three have your tasks, Kakashi said, ignoring Anko before producing a water balloon from his flak jacket and tossing it to Naruto. Let's get to work. Actually, I'd like to interrupt if you wouldn't mind, came an unfamiliar voice from the edge of the clearing, and all five present turned in surprise to find a tall, white-haired man approaching them. Jiraiya? Kakashi asked, and his tone indicated that even he wasn't expecting this new arrival. What are you doing here? Came to check up on our pal, Naruto, he said, surprising Naruto even further. A bit of an inspection, you could say. Naruto scratched his head and squinted at him. Who the hell are you? I'm glad you asked. Jiraiya perked up and he prepared to begin his grand kabuki introduction before he leaped out of the way of a barrage of kunai, courtesy of an irritated Anko. No, none of that shit, she growled. You're interrupting their training. Hein, Jiraiya sighed dramatically. Meanwhile, Naruto leaned over to whisper to his most knowledgeable teammate. Sakura, who is that? That's Jiraiya of the legendary Sannin, she whispered back. Three of the most powerful ninja to ever come out of Konoha and students of the Sandaime. Naruto's curiosity dimmed minutely at that last revelation. Oh, thanks. Your teammate's right, kid, Jiraiya suddenly acknowledged from behind Naruto, where he absolutely had not been mere moments prior. I'm here to check up on your situation. He was clearly trying to be discreet about it, but Naruto was having none of it. My team already knows. You can just say it. That actually surprised the older man, but he just shrugged. Alright, makes things easier. Lift your shirt so I can take a look at the seal. Why? Naruto slowly drawled in suspicion, though he realized a bit too late after he asked that blatant suspicion may not have been the best move if the goal was to stay under the radar for now. However, the biggest surprise of all was Sasuke coming to his defense. How do we know that you're not some old pervert trying to cop a glimpse at some preteen's body? None of the adults, nor Naruto himself, were expecting that question, and the results were immediate. Kakashi fell to his knees in incredulity, Anko fell over in raucous laughter, and Jiraiya nearly jumped out of his skin at the insinuation. Yeah. Sakura stepped in next, putting herself between Naruto and Jiraiya. Keep away from our friend, you creep. While Jiraiya shot into indignant sputtering and attempted to clear his name, Naruto gratefully took the allotted moment to confer inward. Kyuubi, what should we do? What if he looks into the seal and sees the Jubi? He won't. The seal that binds me to you and the one that binds the Jubi to you are separate entities. The bars that trap me are a representation of the seal that he is seeking to inspect. Wait, then why are you guys in the same room if the seals are separate? Because it's easier for your feeble human mind to visualize it as such. Hey. Was the insult necessary, you jackass? That's sure not a whole lot of finding my other half that you're doing right now. Ugh, whatever. Thanks for the reassurance regardless, Kyuubi. Coming back to reality, Naruto was met with Sakura fending Jiraiya off with a kunai, while Sasuke prepared to blast him with a dragon flame jutsu. Guys. Naruto said, pausing the mayhem before it could devolve. It's fine. He can look. With Naruto's assurance given, his teammate stepped back and allowed him the space to work while maintaining narrowed glares. Jiraiya sighed and kneeled as Naruto lifted his shirt and molded chakra, making the seal visible for him to inspect. Jiraiya hummed. Nothing seems to be out of the ordinary. Still the same immaculate work as always. As always. Naruto thought in confusion, not remembering meeting Jiraiya at any point in the past. Alright, you can pull your shirt down, Jiraiya said, and Naruto did so. Show me the cursed seal. Naruto hesitated once again, but he complied and tugged at his collar to expose the mark left by Orochimaru. Jiraiya peered at it, and he whistled. I've never seen this variety before, he remarked. Must be new. At least it's contained for now. Jiraiya stood back up and sighed. My old teammate never fails to impress. Old teammate. Naruto minutely grew alarmed, and then something Orochimaru said in the Forest of Death replayed in his mind. The Hokage knows, the village elders know, and I'm sure your sensei knows. Even my former teammate has to know, he was named your godfather, after all. Godfather? Well, that about does it, Jiraiya announced. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to borrow your two sensei for a bit. What for? Anko asked, having finally calmed down from her laughing fit. Stumbled on some info I figured you'd want to know about, he vaguely replied. Take 5, you 3, Kakashi instructed. We'll be back in a minute. Once the three adults flickered away, Sakura immediately pulled the other two into a huddle. How the hell did he find us if this place is specifically supposed to be a secret from everyone? She shouted. If one of the Sannin can find us, then who's to say one of the others can't, as well? Sasuke muttered with a glower. Exactly. And who knows who else is watching us if that's the case? Sakura stressed. Do you think the Hokage is keeping tabs on us all the way out here? Sasuke surmised. Is Kakashi in on it? I don't know, Sakura huffed in frustration. It's tough to say. He seemed surprised too, but we can't truly know either way. He's my godfather, Naruto mumbled, catching both of their attention. Wait, what? Sasuke asked in confusion. That guy, Jiraiya, Naruto clarified, his tone growing darker. He's my godfather. But you're an orphan, Sakura pointed out, equally confused. I am, Naruto nodded. Orochimaru said that his teammate was my godfather and that he knew my parents. Then where the fuck has he been all these years? Sasuke shouted in growing rage. Is that why he was fixated on the seal? Sakura thought aloud. Did he come to inspect it on the Hokage's orders? Don't know, and I frankly don't care, Naruto lamented. Just another untrustworthy person to add to the pile. We can definitely confirm that the Sandaime is keeping tabs on us, Sasuke nodded in agreement. Whether or not Kakashi and Anko are involved remains to be seen. Naruto grunted, and the other two turned to him. I think Anko might be cool, and I'm willing to give Kakashi-sensei the benefit of the doubt. They wouldn't be teaching us such dangerous jutsu if they didn't trust us. That's a surprising level of deduction from you, Sasuke remarked, swiftly dodging his foot out of the way of Sakura's stomp. Anyway, Sakura irritably said, so long as things remain the way they are, we may have to rely on ourselves around here for the long haul. Seems that way, Sasuke agreed. Team 7 sticks together, Naruto announced. Team 7 sticks together, Sakura nodded in agreement. Team 7 sticks together, Sasuke affirmed. Then, Kakashi and Anko returned to the clearing, and the three genin broke the huddle and faced their sensei. Alright, let's get to work, Kakashi announced, and they nodded. The festive mood of the village about the finals of the Chunin exams was no more apparent than within the packed stadium. The energy was electric amongst the spectators, many traveling far and wide to watch the vaunted spectacle of adolescent bloodsport. People from lowly peasants all the way to esteemed nobility and everyone in between were in attendance. The roar of the crowd reverberated through the arena, filling the ears of the genin standing in the center of it all. It was all so trite and pointless in Orochimaru's opinion. Once you experience one Chunin exam, you've experienced them all, so the luster of the event wore thin very quickly. He didn't care for any of the lowly genin battling for their pride and a chance for career advancement, nor did he care for the blatant pony show the village put on for prospective buyers. He especially didn't care for the dick measuring contest between hidden villages that these exams ultimately amounted to. If you were going to go to war, just go to war and spare everyone the needless peacocking. What Orochimaru did care about, though, was the old monkey beside him, or more accurately, finally killing the old monkey beside him after he watched the village he loved so dearly go up in flames. He cared about the total annihilation of Konoha and all its inhabitants in a blaze of glory. He cared about finally watching the fruits of his labor in marking Team 7 come to fruition. Yes, he was practically salivating to watch just how far Team 7 had progressed over the course of a month, provided they were ever present to begin with, which they currently were not. What the fuck? Where the hell had that brat, Kakashi, taken them, and why weren't they here right now? He had half a mind to rip off his disguise and hunt them down himself before bending that silver-haired dipshit over his knee and disciplining him for poisoning his future proteges with a total disregard for punctuality. He'd be sure to signal to Kabuto to give Kakashi Haddock an especially gruesome death once the invasion began in earnest. "You seem troubled, Rasa," Hiruzen spoke up from beside him. "Is something the matter?" Orochimaru cleared his throat and put on the deceased Kazukiya's voice. "No, I'm simply still feeling the effects of the trip. I've only recently gotten over a bad cold, which is why I elected to keep my mask on to avoid spreading any lingering germs." "How considerate of you," Hiruzen chuckled. "If only my former students were considerate enough to visit every once in a while. They always enjoyed watching these exams with me back in the day." "I can certainly imagine," Rasa chuckled along. "I'll be sure to be especially considerate when I snap your fucking neck, you phony piece of shit." Just then, Raito Namiashi appeared kneeling beside Hiruzen. "Lord Hokage, Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Naruto Uzumaki are still nowhere to be found. What do you suggest?" "Begin the matches as planned," Hiruzen answered. "If they are not here by the time their matches begin, I'll make a final determination." Raito nodded and flickered away to inform Genma to begin the proceedings. Internally, Orochimaru groaned. If it was just one of them missing, then perhaps he could have persuaded Hiruzen to push the match to the end with some bullshit about the nobles traveling a long way to watch these high-priority candidates in action. With all of them gone, though, it would take a miracle to spare them all disqualification. He was milliseconds away from signaling to Kabuto to focus exclusively on Kakashi after he cast the Genjutsu, but a leafy whirlwind in the center of the arena stayed his hand. It captured the attention of the entire stadium, as well, as right as Genma was going to begin the first battle, Team 7 in all their glory appeared in a flashy crowd-pleasing entrance, no doubt devised by Kakashi. Cheeky prick. Scanning over his newest projects, Orochimaru was admittedly taken by surprise by each of their new getups. His eyes landed in particular on the pink one's trench coat, which was very reminiscent of Anko's. Of course, she'd sink her claws into her when she found out that he branded her, as well. Anko should have spared herself the double dose of heartache she would no doubt feel when they abandoned the village and came to him. No matter. All of his pieces were now in play, and all he had to do was wait for the moment to strike. Naruto wasn't prepared for all eyes to be on him. He was expecting it when Kakashi told them about his plan for their stylish entrance, but he was not ready for what felt like the entire village to be staring at him, or more specifically him and his team. Ordinarily, he would probably be grinning and puffing his chest out to make a show of himself in front of all of the people he'd be presiding over as Hokage in the future, but as he scanned over the raucous crowd and his gaze inevitably swept over the cage booth, he didn't really feel like soaking in the attention and adulation, of which was mostly split unevenly amongst the three of them anyway. "Seriously, Kakashi?" Deadpanned an annoyed Jonin with a senbon in his mouth as he approached. "Couldn't make an exception to be on time just this once?" "Relax, Genma," Kakashi replied with an infuriating eye smile. "The spectacle is half the fun. That is why we're all here after all, right?" "Whatever," Genma sighed. "You're lucky your brats weren't first up anyway." Genma then turned to address the crowd, and only then did Naruto realize that this was a different proctor than the one from the preliminaries. "Let the final stage of the Chunin exams get underway," he announced, and the crowd roared in anticipation. "The first bout of the finals will be Shino Aburam vs Kankuro of Sunagakure. I withdraw," Kankuro suddenly declared, silencing the crowd and bringing all attention to the end of the line where the Suna Genin were standing. "What?" Genma questioned, unsure if he had heard him correctly. The crowd was also hoping that they had all misheard him. "I withdraw," Kankuro repeated, confirming the audience's fears. "I won't be competing." There was a beat of silence in which Genma, the other Genin, and the spectators all stared at Kankuro in a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and incredulity. Then, boos erupted from the crowd like an alarm blaring across the village, and suddenly, Naruto felt relief that all of the attention was ripped away from his team and focused squarely on an indifferent Kankuro. Well, he was indifferent until the jeering really kicked into gear. Chants of, "You suck, coward, bitch," and even, "desert scum," rained down on Kankuro alongside already empty wrappers and containers. Naruto could have sworn that he even heard, just like a filthy sand rat, amongst the onslaught. That was a bit uncalled for in Naruto's opinion. Kankuro, on the other hand, barely looked to be fazed by the vitriol of the crowd until a tomato struck the back of his head. "Ow!" he barked, turning and scowling up at the section of the crowd behind him. "Who the hell threw that?" "You look like a girl, you fucking," was the hollered answer he received from someone leaning over the guardrail. Kankuro would have jumped into the crowd to show who said that what for, but the fact that it came from the mouth of a frail old lady caught him off guard just long enough for Genma to regain control of the proceedings. "Kankuro of Sunagakure has forfeited his place in the tournament." Genma announced, and then he turned to Shikamaru, who had the misfortune of standing between Shino and Niji, the only barrier preventing a grievous mauling from occurring, likely in a mutual effort. Shikamaru Nara, since you were set to face the winner of this match anyway, you'll just be slotted into Kankuro's place. Is that fine? Shikamaru stared blankly at Genma in response before his eyes briefly darted to the ominously buzzing Shino on his left and then back to Genma. Do I have a choice in the matter? Not really, Genma answered, returning Shikamaru's blank stare with one of his own. What a drag, he sighed, but he remained on the field nonetheless, idly feeling the glares of both Ino and his mother in the crowd, daring him to forfeit the match. Now, then, let the finals of the Chunin selection exams officially commence. Genma declared to the crowd's roaring approval. All competitors not named Shino Aburam and Shikamaru Nara are dismissed to the competitors' box. Now that they were guaranteed a fight, the crowd was on their feet once again. The insatiable bloodthirst of the usually docile populace was so palpable, in fact, that it brought a bead of sweat down Sakura's forehead. These people are rabid, Sakura muttered with a bit of trepidation, and Naruto couldn't help but agree. Behind them, Kakashi sighed. Like I said, the spectacle is half the fun, and the bloodsport is just part and parcel of the spectacle. Then, he somehow ruffled all three of their heads at once. Good luck, you three. I'll be watching the whole time. With that, he vanished in a swirl of leaves, and Team 7 was left to exit the battlefield with the others. Wasn't that already a given? Sakura asked, confused as to why their sensei felt the need to assure them that he'd stick around for their matches. Don't think about it harder than necessary, Sasuke muttered as he followed the departing Suna trio and Niji toward the nearest tunnel. Fair enough, Sakura sighed, the weight of her new tan trench coat bearing down on her slumped shoulders. Come on, Naruto, let's grab a good spot in the booth. Naruto nodded and followed his teammates, but his mind was still mostly elsewhere. Putting on the hood of his new jacket that was really similar to his old one, beyond having a black upper half and a hood in place of a collar, he tuned out every other bit of stimuli and focused on his thoughts. Whereas they were dominated by the crowd and Sandaime when he arrived, they were hearkening back to something that had been eating at him for the past week. It's unsettling you as well. Yeah. Juby's been quiet. Way too quiet. Which is why I'm perplexed at you wasting time on a pointless promotion in lieu of locating my other half. You are risking my existence for the chance at receiving a meaningless vest that we both know you won't be granted in any event. Okay, fuck you, first and foremost. Second, I couldn't just ditch the team and run off to find the stupid temple. No way Kakashi and Anko-sensei let me go without a really good explanation, and if the village found out about the Juby inside of the cursed seal, I'd either be executed or locked away forever. Your freedom is less crucial to me than my continued existence. Naruto audibly sighed, unknowingly grabbing Sakura's attention. Yeah, I know. Are you okay, Naruto? He heard Sakura ask, and he turned to see that she was looking at him with a bit of concern. Yeah, I'm fine, he waved her off. Just talking to the fox. I have a name. You gonna tell me what it is? The loud, dark snort echoed through his mind. No. Didn't think so. Oh, Sakura muttered in interest, and she quietly considered how to ask the question that was on her mind as they made their way up the stairs toward the competitor's box. Sasuke, who was just ahead of them, had also turned an eye back to listen in on the conversation in interest, and they were fortunately the only people in earshot. What's he like? She eventually asked, and Naruto had to pause and really think about that. Fortunately for him, the fox in question chimed in to provide him with a proper response. The unquantifiable magnificence and unyielding splendor of me, the most powerful natural being in all of creation, cannot properly be done justice through a simple description from the mouth of a lowly human. One must be blessed to be in the presence of a creature so regal and omnipotent to truly feel the breadth of their puny existence be dwarfed before the might of the Kyuubi. He's really high on himself, Naruto finally answered. This my furry fucking ass, you degenerate flesh bag. Sakura placed a hand over her mouth to stifle a laugh, and even Sasuke let loose a snort with a small smirk, almost as if they could feel the indignant ranting going on within the seal. Maybe they could. The Kyuubi's anger was incredibly potent, after all. When they finally made it into the booth, the match had already begun, and Team 7 sidled to the rail and got a front row spot for the action a healthy distance away from the other competitors. On one end, Niji didn't even bother watching the fight, instead opting to stand with his eyes closed and his arms folded in the corner nearest to the exit. On the other end, 2/3 of the Suna team was watching the fight from the edge of the viewing deck when Naruto wasn't catching Temari, sending their team lingering glances, at least, while Gaara was openly staring at Naruto with nothing short of homicidal excitement in his wild teal gaze. That kid was weird. The Juby snapping its head in the direction of Gaara while still not saying a word, long string of gibberish. Didn't ease Naruto's mind one bit. So how do I find the Uzumaki temple, and could you tell me more about them at some point? The loud yawn echoed through the mindscape. The clan library within the Senju compound would be the ideal place to begin your search. Naruto brightened at that information, though he didn't know if the Kyuubi was answering one or both of his questions. Awesome. Where is that? How the hell should I know? The brightness faded from Naruto's countenance with slight annoyance trickling in to replace it. You've lived in this village a lot longer than I have, so I figured you would have remembered it or something. Live is a really strong word, human. It's more accurate to say that I've been held prisoner inside of human vessels in this village for 6 times as long as you've been alive. Do you know where the goddamn compound is or not? Naruto could hear the Kyuubi's careless shrug. I'd know it if I saw it. I wouldn't be able to guide you there, though. Perhaps if you sent out shadow clones to comb the village, I could confirm if you're on the right track through whatever memories are sent back when they stumble onto something. Most of the village is here in the arena, so the likelihood that you'll run into distractions out there is also minimal. Naruto's resulting awestruck expression was taken as intrigue regarding the vicious game of cat and mouse between Shino and Shikamaru down below. That's actually a fantastic idea. You're wicked smart, Kyuubi. Of all of the Biju, I was the one that went to college. What? Shadow clones, human. You're wasting time. Right. Naruto nearly formed his signature cross seal, but he stopped short when it occurred to him that he probably shouldn't just spawn a bunch of clones out of nowhere and have them leap into action right in view of everyone. That would surely cause a brief panic among the present shinobi before they realized it was him, but the panic felt by the civilians probably wouldn't be so brief, and causing a case of mass hysteria would do nothing but complicate things. He needed a way to be low-key about it, but how? His train of thought drew his gaze to the swarm of Kakechu pouring out of Shino's coat and emerging from the dirt underfoot to surround Shikamaru, despite him having been caught by the shadow possession jutsu. The swarm was imposing, but the bugs themselves were very small. Small enough to go unnoticed if a few were to fly away from the stadium. Jackpot. With a grin, Naruto quietly stepped away from the viewing platform and walked back into the hallway, telling Sakura and Sasuke that he'd be back in a sec before vanishing into the darkness. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. He shouted before an army of clones popped into existence around him, nearly filling the hallway to the brim. Moments later, each clone transformed into a fly and flew down the hall, entering the battlefield and slipping out of the arena under the cover of Shino's swarm. Mission underway, Naruto snickered in self-satisfaction. Some of the clones would revert to human form once they made it out of the arena, while the remaining flies would continue towards the edges of the village, where many of the clan compounds were situated. While the flies were scouring the village, the human clones would check the Konoha library for information on the Senju compound and, if he was lucky, any information on the Uzumaki name. If they had a special temple that somehow held the answers to regaining the half of the Kyuubi that the Yondaime took with him to the Shinigami, then maybe they were of some level of importance. It begged the question of why he was so alone if they were. He shook those darkening thoughts out of his head. One plot thread at a time. He'd get the memories of his clones if they found anything useful, and then he'd go from there. The call of "Winner, Shino Aburum" from Genma and the resulting roar of the crowd brought him back to the present. However, as he turned back to re-enter the booth, he was nearly knocked over by Neji, harshly brushing past him without even sparing him a single glance. It took everything within Naruto to not chase him down and wring his neck right there for everything he had done. Instead, he took several deep breaths and let him continue down the dark corridor. He was Sasuke's opponent, so he'd get his teeth kicked in either way. Besides, Naruto didn't really want to be around the dark aura permeating from Neji like a pungent cloud any longer than he had to. Turning around again, he smiled when he saw Sasuke heading in his direction, presumably also to the field. "Where'd you scamper off to?" Sasuke asked with a quirked eyebrow. Naruto's smile dimmed and a look of contemplation settled over him. There really wasn't any reason to not tell Sasuke the whole truth about the urgency of his cursed seal, but it would probably be easier to tell him and Sakura at the same time. With that in mind, he could still broach the other subject of his search to Sasuke. An abnormally sober, cerulean gaze met Onyx, and Sasuke was once again faced with a scarily contemplative Naruto. It was a sight that he had been slowly getting used to over the past month, but it was still a jarring juxtaposition to Naruto's typical empty-headed presentation. If you felt like something big was being hidden from you about your clan, and you found a way to potentially figure out what it was, how far would you go to do that? Naruto finally spoke, actually taking Sasuke aback with the question. "Does this have anything to do with your parents?" Sasuke responded in kind, and Naruto nodded while giving a so-so gesture. Naruto could tell that Sasuke understood that there was more to this, and he could also tell that Sasuke wasn't going to pry. Instead, he mulled something over for a silent few seconds before meeting Naruto's gaze once more. "I'd go far enough to know not to ask my teammate any questions if he was planning on doing the same," Sasuke carefully answered. Naruto chewed on that response for a bit, but he eventually accepted it with a nod and raised his hand for a high five to send Sasuke on his way. Sasuke flatly stared at the offered hand, trying, and failing, to ignore the growing grin on his teammate's face before he eventually caved and begrudgingly high-fived him. Was that so hard? Naruto snickered. HN was all Sasuke offered in reply as he continued on his way down the stairs. Kick his ass, Sasuke. Naruto hollered from the top of the stairs and Sasuke nodded with a confident smirk. That smirk vanished when he reached the bottom of the stairs and came face to face with Shino on his way back up to the booth. He was standing in the middle of the corridor, unmoving as if he was waiting specifically for Sasuke. Sasuke had a sneaking suspicion as to what the interaction would entail, but he silently allowed Shino the floor, nonetheless. It is forbidden for Konoha shinobi to use lethal force on a comrade, Shino clinically began, and Sasuke's suspicions were confirmed. However, it is merely frowned upon for such to happen during a sanctioned event, such as the Chunin exams. Upon Sasuke's slow nod, Shino continued. If, for whatever reason, unforeseen circumstances lend themselves to Niji Hyuga coming down with a severe case of death, neither I nor any of my team would hold it against you. Yep, that definitely was what Sasuke was expecting. He couldn't exactly say that he was surprised, nor did he blame Shino one bit for making that request without actually saying anything that could constitute treason. He'd be a pretty fat hypocrite if he did. With his piece said, Shino continued past Sasuke and began scaling the stairs toward the competitor's booth. Suddenly, though, Shino stopped to address Sasuke one last time. I, however, will hold it against you if you defeat him, yet he is still able to walk away on his own power. With that, he continued back on his way, and Sasuke simply turned and made his way toward the battlefield. Finally, one of the brats is up, Anko grinned, plopping dango into her mouth from her stick with a flourish. Looking over to her right, she offered some of her dango to Kurenai sitting silently beside her. Ordinarily, Kurenai would turn down the offered treat as she wasn't really a fan, definitely not to the level of Anko. However, after a moment of dispassionately staring down at the dango, she lowered her head and bit down on the stick, making Anko smile. At least one of them was able to. Anko could tell that her friend was still grieving, understandably so, and the Chunin exam finals were probably not the greatest place to be after watching your student who was as close to a surrogate daughter as one could get be mauled to death by her cousin in another sanctioned setting. Watching that very same cousin take the field with an expression so cold that it felt right at home in the latest Princess Gale movie definitely wasn't helping matters. However, her other student was participating in the finals and he had just won his match, so duty called. Anko sighed, ready to take the acceptance of the dango as a small victory before Kurenai spoke up, her hardened gaze focused on the two genin taking the field like laser sights. You trained Sasuke Uchiha, right? Kurenai questioned. With Kakashi. Anko nodded. Yeah. Kakashi wanted to train them into monsters to be able to handle what's certain to come in the future, and he needed help doing it. I was uniquely qualified to assist in their situations. Kurenai nodded in understanding. All of the Jonin had been briefed about the situation with Team 7, particularly Naruto and Sasuke. Those two were already labeled flight risks for different reasons, and the addition of cursed seals from Orochimaru just made the situation more pressing in the eyes of the Sandaime. While she understood the rationale behind treating their defections as a real possibility, she didn't really agree with handling them as if defection was a foregone conclusion, but she also wasn't the Hokage. Still, flight risk or not, cursed seal or not, and neglected Jinchuriki or not, none of those kids were as much of a clear danger to others as Niji Hyuga, the psychopath who brutalized his cousin because he blamed her for his father being born minutes after Hiashi Hyuga. Her expression darkened, but she was able to keep the emotions out of her countenance. She had done enough crying and had shattered enough training posts this month. Do you think Sasuke can beat him? She asked Anko instead, finally tearing her gaze away from the object of her fury and leveling it at her closest friend. Anko hummed, tapping her chin with her stick of dango. Well, the Hyuga kid is tough and brutal. He's really fast, and the gentle fist is a deadly style to go up against as it is. Won't be an easy fight, that's for sure. But will he lose? Anko smirked. Many eyes were focused squarely on the two vaunted genin in the arena. The reputations of the Uchiha and Hyuga clans spoke for themselves, even if the entirety of one of those clans was standing in the center of the arena. Word of a face-off between the young prodigy of the Hyuga and the lone scion of the Uchiha had traveled far and wide, and the hype had reached a fever pitch. This battle was arguably the one that most in the stadium had come to bear witness to, particularly those who had traveled a great distance. Everyone wanted to see who would come out on top between the Byakugan and the Sharingan. Everyone except Hanabi Hyuga. All she wanted was to see a glorious mural painted on the walls of the stadium with the blood of her sister's murderer. Her gaze, like everyone else's, was focused on the two in the center of the arena. However, hers was so intense that her Byakugan unconsciously activated at points. She wanted to see justice carried out. She needed to see justice carried out. Beside her, her father could read her thoughts like a children's book. The concoction of heartache, sorrow, and righteous fury was written all over her face, and the occasional bulging veins of her Byakugan only ensured that they were written in all caps. The thought of chastising her for allowing herself to be read so easily briefly crossed his mind before he squashed it. She was allowed to grieve, just as he was. He would have been lying if he said that he wanted anything less than to murder the Raikage and tear Kumo asunder with his bare hands when his ashi was offered up to them in his place. The dark thought that Kumo was responsible for his brother's death and indirectly responsible for his daughter's death also began to burgeon, and he did not squash that one. Sasuke's gaze, as black as the one-piece jumper he sported, was focused on the white pools of barely contained loathing sitting in Niji's sockets. It wasn't purely directed at him either, but rather the world at large. While it wasn't exactly akin to looking in the mirror, Sasuke was still reminded of his own gaze when he was much younger. Fresh off the massacre, so many different emotions swept through him like a morose riptide. Confusion, betrayal, heartbreak, rage, and most prominently, hatred. So, how does a traumatized 7-year-old make sense of and express those complex feelings without lashing out at anything and everything? Well, by isolating himself and stewing in his festering hatred, of course. Focusing that hatred into an ultimate goal to live toward, one to build the foundation of his existence on, was the one thing that kept him going. He would grow strong enough to avenge his clan, discarding the paltry bonds and distractions that were forced upon him by the village if he had to. Nothing mattered beyond retribution, at least until he found himself on Team 7 and was forced to interact with people who understood loneliness and trauma just as well as he did, even if in different manners. Sakura never spoke about it, but the subtle flinches and lengths she'd sometimes go to when hiding certain parts of her body didn't paint a fantastic picture, and Naruto was a bucket of unaddressed trauma in and of himself. Interacting closely with equally broken preteens with no one to seek comfort in was a shock to Sasuke's system. Apparently, it was possible that he wasn't the only severely traumatized child in a military settlement full of orphans and families of orphan-making mercenaries. Also, apparently, trauma was a fantastic bonding agent, and having someone of a like mind who could potentially understand and empathize to talk to went a long way. Go figure. With that in mind, the trauma bonds he forged with his teammates wouldn't win him this fight. The agonizing month of brutal, non-stop training he underwent alongside his trauma buddies, though, Sasuke Uchiha, Neji coldly addressed, his Byakugan flaring to life in a narrowed glare as he leaned into a stance of the gentle fist. 6 years ago, your brother annihilated the refuse that once populated your clan. Today, I will finish the job. Sasuke's Sharingan spun to life as well, matching Neji's glare as he entered the stance of the interceptor fist. If you think this fight will be the same as you bullying your wallflower cousin, you've already lost. It was her fate to die by my hands, just as it will be yours, Neji callously replied. Sasuke derisively snorted. It's my ambition to eliminate a kinslayer, so I suppose this will be good practice. The main house is no kin of mine, Neji spat. They are our slavers. Nothing more, nothing less. The tension in the arena was rising faster bread in the oven. Sasuke could feel the anger pouring off of both Neji and the contingent of Hyuga in the audience. The fact that he just came out and blatantly said that told Sasuke that Neji had nothing left to lose, so this fight legitimately becoming a deathmatch was all but guaranteed, at least on Neji's end. Welp. Sasuke held no great love for kinslayers, so this was no skin off his nose. Someone had to put this mad dog down before he hurt anyone else. The next bout, Sasuke Uchiha vs Neji Hyuga. Genma announced to the crowd that was waiting with bated breath. Even he was intrigued about how this fight would play out. The two tomo of Sasuke's Sharingan spun dangerously while the veins of Neji's Byakugan burned in anticipation. The tension was so thick that if one tried to cut it with a kunai, it would get stuck. Then, Genma raised his arm before slicing it down to initiate the fight. Begin. Neither combatant wasted any time darting for each other and launching into a heated exchange of blows. Neji struck quickly and violently, every single jab and palm thrust poised to slam into a vital area in an attempt to do away with Sasuke as quickly and as brutally as possible. Sasuke, however, dodged and parried the blows with just as much grace, returning fire every step of the way. It was a deadly dance of two highly skilled martial artists on the path to mastering their craft, and to the eyes of most of the crowd in attendance, the boys were evenly matched. The truth was a bit more complex than that. Neji was fast, far faster than most chunin in the village, in fact, but Sasuke had no issues keeping up with him. His Sharingan had grown beyond a point where deciphering and deconstructing Neji's offense was possible, and his body had been ruthlessly trained beyond the point where executing those counters was possible. The trouble was that even a glancing blow from the gentle fist could cause considerable damage. Blocking and deflecting Neji's strikes was simple. Doing so in a way that didn't eventually leave Sasuke a defenseless mannequin was much less so. So, while Niji was lagging in a straight jutsu contest as he couldn't really string together a series of landed hits onto Sasuke, Sasuke was steadily feeling the effects of the chakra pouring out of Niji's hands, slamming into his chakra system, and it was ever so slightly slowing him down. Batting away an incoming strike aimed for his throat at Niji's wrist, Sasuke swiped a kunai out of his pouch and swung right at Niji's eyes. Just as expected, Niji met his kunai with one of his own, occupying one hand and leaving the other to do the remainder of the work. Sasuke intercepted another jab from Niji's free hand with his fist before sliding his fingers between Niji's and completing a horse seal. That caught Niji off guard just long enough for Sasuke to kick him in the knee and complete a tiger seal. Niji caught on to what was happening and forced his other hand out of the kunai struggle, but it was too late as Sasuke used him as a stepladder and launch pad to propel himself into a corkscrew backflip before blasting a blazing hot fireball right at Niji from point-blank range. Niji narrowly dodged the first one, and the margins were even slimmer on the second and third ones that came in succession. As he skidded to a stop, the fourth and final fireball jutsu came into view, and this one was substantially larger than the previous ones. He could feel the heat radiating off the apparent mini-sun that Sasuke had just fired at him long before it even reached him, and Sasuke, as well as the crowd, witnessed the ball of flame slam into the spot Niji was standing and erupt into a brilliant blaze. There was an audible gasp through the arena as it appeared that Niji had been swallowed up by the inferno, but Sasuke knew better. Only moments later, the flames dispersed into the makings of a cyclone, and there stood Niji relatively unharmed with a disdainful sneer. The crowd launched into an excited murmur at Niji's shocking resistance to fire, but Hiashi didn't share that excitement. His brow crinkled in a fusion of incredulity and wonder at exactly how Niji escaped near certain immolation. "Impossible," he muttered aloud. Beside him, Hanabi recognized it as well, and her frown darkened even further. That murderer was using main house techniques. What gave him the right? If this is all you have, then this farce will not last much longer, Ichiha, Niji spat before re-entering his stance. Sasuke gazed critically at Niji for a long moment and then he procured 2 handfuls of shuriken and launched them right at Niji. Niji simply scoffed before dashing forward, weaving through and around the onslaught with practiced ease. He even snagged a shuriken through the hoop with his finger and batted away a few others with it before flicking that shuriken back at Sasuke. With Niji quickly approaching, Sasuke dodged the shuriken with a simple lean of his head before firing a phoenix flower jutsu at him. Niji's scoff was even haughtier as he shot out his palm, blasting a powerful, far-reaching wave of chakra directly from his hand. It was a more powerful spin on the 8 trigrams vacuum palm that he had been working on, and while the vacuum palm's narrower focus lent itself to a deadlier impact, this variation traded precision for a greater area of effect that would certainly overpower each of the flames of the phoenix flower jutsu with little trouble. Fortunately for Niji, it did just that. Unfortunately for Niji, it exposed a shuriken hidden within the flames that were not so easily dismissed by the empowered vacuum palm. In a panic, Niji was forced to halt his advance lest he run right through the incoming shuriken that were maybe a second away from turning him into a fatalistic pincushion. 8 trigrams palm rotation. He bellowed, transforming into an impromptu dreidel while emitting chakra from his body to erect a spinning dome of chakra that blocked the barrage of shuriken, kicking up a cloud of dust all the while. Sasuke was forced to jump back from the display and create zone distance, but his suspicions were confirmed. Niji created a wall of chakra to block that last grand fireball, which explained the twisting nature of the flames as it was dispersed. A fireball couldn't penetrate it, and neither could shuriken. It didn't leave Sasuke out of options, but a defense like that did all by guarantee that this would end up a battle to the death. Niji, meanwhile, was both oblivious and uncaring of Sasuke's internal monologue. Once he came to a stop, he indulged in his assured victory by sending Sasuke a cocky smirk. "Now do you realize the folly of your actions in accepting this battle, Uchiha? The 8 trigrams palm rotation is the ultimate impenetrable defense, so your only option is to engage me hand to hand and be cut down by the gentle fist. It doesn't matter how special you believe your eyes to be, these eyes see all, and that includes your imminent demise." It was only the visual prowess of the Byakugan that spared Niji an embarrassing death via decapitation. So wrapped up was he in his self-indulgent spiel that he nearly missed Sasuke unsealing a tanto and covering the distance between them in a mere moment. He evaded the swing of the blade, but only enough to spare his neck from any pain, as a lock of his hair was sliced off for his troubles. "You talk too much," Sasuke deadpanned, saying nothing else as he continued swiping at Niji with the tanto given to him by Kakashi for this very battle. Niji now found himself tangibly on the back foot as even with his gentle fist, attempting to go blow for blow with a sharpened blade would result in the loss of 11 of his fingers. He was forced to place all of his efforts into evasion and only striking during the split-second windows allotted by Sasuke's infuriatingly competent Kenjutsu burst. If he wanted to regain the edge, he needed to remove that Tanto from the equation, and there was one jutsu he could use that would assuredly do just that. As Neji ducked under a swing meant to slit his throat, he didn't even bother calling out the name of his next move to focus the jutsu, rather just launching into a ferocious series of strikes for the 8 trigram 64 palms. Even with the Sharingan, the lightning-fast burst of offense from Neji caught Sasuke flat-footed, knocking the Tanto out of his hands and immersing him into a brand new hell. It was over just as quickly as it began, but the searing pain that lanced through his body at the sudden closure of about a fifth of his chakra network on top of the Tenketsu that were affected at the opening exchange of the battle. It didn't knock him to the ground entirely, but it did bring him to his knees and all but cripple his ability to mold chakra with any degree of ease. His gaze fell to the Tanto sitting discarded to the side, but Neji kicked it away before he could reach for it and drove the sole of his sandal into Sasuke's face, breaking his nose with a loud crunch. That knocked Sasuke to the ground and sent him slightly skidding along the dirt. "Now do you understand the hopelessness of your situation, Uchiha?" Neji began again. "It was always your destiny to fall here, just as it was your wretched clan's destiny to fall to a single man. Here you lay at the mercy of your better, just like the rest of them. You'd know quite a bit about that, wouldn't you, Branch House?" Sasuke sniped while on the ground, and the fury that washed over Neji's expression for a brief moment before it was ruthlessly quelled into a dark glower brought Sasuke a smile. No matter what, Sasuke Uchiha would never go out like a bitch. "Do not speak of matters you know absolutely nothing about," Neji icily spat, bringing his foot down onto Sasuke's abdomen and grinding it into his chest cavity. "You do well to roll over like a dog and die, just as how I imagine your father did before his eldest." Even if with Neji's foot in his chest and a well of rage bubbling within at the mockery of his family's slaying, Sasuke would not rise to the bait. The fact that Neji was so taken with posturing over him in his victory meant that he wholeheartedly believed that Sasuke was defeated and bereft of any means of escaping this predicament. Sasuke most certainly wasn't, but he did need some time to focus whatever chakra he could manage to drag up exactly where he needed it, so perhaps he could keep Neji talking in the meantime after he got another cheap shot in. "I guess that's one area we relate in if I'm not mistaken," Sasuke managed a rough chuckle through Neji's now still boot. "Our fathers rolling over and dying for someone else's selfish whims." Neji ruthlessly stomped Sasuke's diaphragm in a rage, but Sasuke wasn't done. "He died like a bitch, didn't he?" Another stomp. "He was the sacrificial lamb, and now his body's laying discarded somewhere in a Kumo garbage heap." A third, more vicious stomp drove into his chest, and Sasuke coughed a bit of blood onto his taunting smile. "He definitely wasn't finished. And you blamed Hinata for it instead of accepting that it was your father's destiny to be disposable." "Silence, you ignorant wretch." Neji roared, damn near foaming at the mouth as he attempted to stomp Sasuke's head into the ground, but his foot only left an imprint in the dirt as Sasuke slid his head out of the way. "You know nothing. You don't know a goddamn thing about my father. You don't know a goddamn thing about how he was callously thrown into the branch house for the mere crime of being born minutes after his brother. You couldn't possibly understand the curse that was levied upon him, myself, and the rest of the branch house for the crime of simply existing." Neji grabbed his forehead protector and ripped it off, tossing it to the ground and exposing the caged bird seal grafted on his forehead to the world. "You have no idea what it's like to be branded with a curse that holds your destiny in its grasp, determining your path before you even had the opportunity to walk it." The look that he received from Sasuke was flatter than the plain sitting on the border of the land of fire and the land of rivers, but it went ignored as he continued his tirade. "This seal signifies both my position as a branch house Hyuga, but also as a slave to the pure household. My father was a master of our clan's arts and far more proficient with them than his brother, yet he was forced to serve him like a dog under the threat of excruciating brain death should he ever step out of line. The same fate was laid at my feet when I came of age and was branded on Hinata's 3rd birthday. Since then, I have been nothing more than a slave at the beck and call of a weakling who couldn't even earn the confidence of her own father." That statement rankled Hiashi in the crowd far more than anything else had, mostly because it was true. Hinata was never meant to be a shinobi. Neji continued, unknowing and uncaring of the crowd paying rapt attention to the mid-fight diatribe. "She was far too soft, far too caring. She was gentle. She was weak. She refused to hurt her younger sister in spars and had no confidence in her abilities. How could you possibly expect someone like that to survive a shinobi's life?" Neji stepped back away from Sasuke, appearing to aim his next words at several people in the audience. Killing her was doing her a greater service than anyone else in this godforsaken village was willing to. Anko acted quickly and shot a snake out of her sleeve to bite Kurenai on the neck, injecting her with a fast-acting paralytic before she could storm the field and do something that would get her headband snatched. It didn't stop the Biju's worth of killing intent that radiated off of her, though. Elsewhere in the crowd, Suum had the scruff of her son's hoodie in an iron grasp as Kiba frothed at the mouth, violently fighting against his mother's hold in a fruitless attempt to leap the barricade and maul Niji. Hiashi, on the other hand, jabbed Hanabi in her blind spot and temporarily rendered her body inert the microsecond he spotted her preparing to leap into action. In the competitor's box, Naruto had Shino in a reverse bear hug while the Kyuubi's chakra poured out of him, covering him and Shino in a crimson cloak that kept his hive at bay. He didn't particularly care who saw at this point. "Don't do anything stupid, Shino," Naruto warned. "You're smarter than that. Sasuke's got this. He knows what he's doing." Buzzing violently in place, Shino slowly nodded, but the fury burning within him like a towering inferno was not quelled. If Sasuke didn't paint the ground red with Niji's blood by the end of the fight, Shino would, rules be damned. Beside them, Sakura stood with her arms crossed between the blatant show of the Kyuubi's chakra and a salivating Gaara, her cursed seal in full force, and her gaze as hard as diamond. She was daring Gaara to make a move before his match with Naruto could begin, and the only thing keeping Gaara in his spot was Shukaku physically rooting his chakra in place to avoid tangling with the fucking Jubi, but he could only do so much for so long. Temari and Kankuro, meanwhile, stood as far away from them as possible, hiding in the darkness of the hallway in pure fear and disbelief alike that not only was someone willfully standing up to their brother without a hint of trepidation, but also that there was someone with power far more intense than anything Gaara was capable of. Niji chuckled, but the chuckle contained less mirth than a mass burial. Killing Hinata was supposed to be the answer. Killing her was my defiance of fate, my rejection of the servitude that was foisted upon the branch house for generations. Perhaps it wouldn't have freed me of my shackles, but it would have certainly made me feel better. His gaze was nearly dead when it landed on Sasuke. It was tired, pouring with a quantity of exhaustion that Sasuke only remembered seeing in his father's eyes after returning from clan meetings at the Naka shrine. His Byakugan were devoid of any natural gaiety and bordered on lacking humanity altogether. "It didn't," Niji finally bit out. "Not only do I feel no better, but my already hellish existence only grew worse. Hinata is dead, and so, too, is the clan's reason to keep me alive. The elders have already made it clear that I am much too dangerous to have around. After all, a proper attack dog cannot grow out of the control of its owner, lest it turn back on them and strike." He huffed, finally having vented all of the turmoil that had been storming through his mind for as long as he could remember. "Well, there it is. That is the undiscriminating hand of fate. Attempts to escape one's fate will only end in ruin." Sasuke didn't have the opportunity to respond before a young, high-pitched shout came from the audience. "Damn it, Uchiha, get up." Hanabi Hyuga screamed at the top of her lungs after the feeling returned to her limbs and she clumsily propped herself against the rail. "You're not allowed to quit until that killer faces justice. Get on your feet and put him down." The raw emotion pouring from her pleas before her father settled her down was enhanced by the break in her voice on the last command, and it struck many in the arena right in their core. Niji, however, glared even harder at the idea of justice of any sort. "Foolish," he scoffed. "There has never been any justice for me." Meanwhile, Sasuke had endured just about enough of this pity party. Thanks to the length of Niji's rant, the chakra he had slowly been pulling from anywhere he could in his body had finally coalesced in a sufficient amount over and around his collarbone. With that in place, all he had to do was kick past the containment seal and allow the cursed seal a little bit of latitude. A sudden burst of foul, violet chakra erupted from Sasuke's prone body alongside the scream that ripped from his throat. Niji was knocked onto his ass by the blast and he subconsciously shuffled backward as Sasuke slowly climbed to his feet. In the stands, Anko was tense, as were the Jonin and Anbu watching along. In the cage booth, the Kazekage smirked under his veil. One Sasuke was standing, the flame pattern of the cursed seal of heaven pulsated with power, and within moments, his tenketsu were forced back open, allowing his chakra to flow uninhibited once again. At the same moment, Sasuke clamped down on the seal with the massive chakra he had pulled over it, and with the added flow of his reinvigorated chakra system, he quickly forced the cursed seal back into containment. The marks receded up his skin and toward the tomos on his collarbone, and just like that, the oppressive aura of the seal had vanished. In the audience, Anko breathed a sigh of relief, and then a grin developed when she put together what he had just done. Elsewhere in the arena, Kakashi was eye-smiling at the risky gambit paying off. In the cage booth, the twitch of the Kazukige's eye was the only visible tell of his frustration, whereas an impressed Hiruzen was smiling in relief. Back on the battlefield, Sasuke was smirking at a wide-eyed, incredulous Niji. Niji had clearly never encountered anyone forcefully reopening their tenketsu without assistance, and Sasuke would revel in it. Who would have guessed that brute-forcing chakra would have come in handy once again? Still, Anko's guidance was for damn sure worth its weight in gold, as even though he was forced to activate the cursed seal, he wasn't in a position where he needed it to continue the fight. He had more than enough in the tank to finish this now that he could actually mold his chakra again. Niji's bewilderment soon became panicked rage thanks in part to Sasuke's mocking smirk, and he sprang into action once again, seeking to tear the Uchiha apart once and for all. Sasuke welcomed the charge, engaging in another fierce taijutsu struggle that once again demonstrated Sasuke's physical superiority in close quarters. However, Sasuke noticed that his edge over Niji had amplified since their initial clash, and not simply due to Niji potentially being fatigued. Instead, it was as if Niji's movements had drastically slowed down in Sasuke's vision. Meanwhile, Sasuke could predict exactly where Niji would strike and how he'd follow with near-perfect accuracy. He was weaving out of Niji's offense and avoiding the chakra waiting in the wings to attack far better than before. Unseen to Sasuke, the two tomo of his Sharingan had become three. Niji was growing increasingly frustrated with the state of the exchange, and that frustration compounded when Sasuke kicked his left leg out from under him and then kneed him in the face, returning the earlier favor by breaking his nose as well. Niji skidded along the ground, clutching his face in agony before he was jolted back into action by the call of Dragon Fire Jutsu. Rolling back to his feet, he started spinning once more. 8 trigrams palm rotation. The dome of chakra flared to life right as the red-hot stream of fire reached him, slamming into the barrier and catching along the spin of the chakra, creating a spinning dome of fire on the outside. Feeling the overbearing heat, Niji was forced to continue spinning and maintaining the barrier, lest the flames collapse in on him and burn him to cinders. He did so for a few seconds longer until the fire jutsu finally subsided and he slowed his spin to an eventual crawl, finally dropping the rotation. What he saw next jolted him back into a spin, pushing every ounce of chakra he could summon back into a second palm rotation. Sasuke, left hand thunderously crackling with a Chidori, zoomed across the arena toward Niji with every intention of ending the fight one way or another. This would truly test if Niji's claim of the palm rotation being the ultimate impenetrable defense would hold up to scrutiny. Chidori met rotation in a glorious light show, lightning cascading over the spinning dome as Sasuke drove his fist into the barrier while Niji frantically fought to maintain it. Everyone in the arena heard the crescendo of cracking that emanated from the barrier, and while it wasn't surprising when the rotation finally gave, it was still a spectacular sight. Sasuke's Chidori finally shattered the rotation like glass, but the force of the impulse jerked his arm slightly upward, causing him to scrape the Chidori right across Niji's face and uncovered forehead as he ran through the circle. It all happened so quickly that Sasuke barely registered that he had made contact with anything until he was already touching the other wall of the stadium. What finally alerted him that he had was the blood soaking the bandages and belts on his arm as the Chidori dispelled, alongside the guttural cries of agony that bellowed from Niji behind him. Turning around, his eyes briefly widened before they settled back into indifference. Niji was clutching his face like a vise, while blood dribbled down his hands and arms. His right eye was completely annihilated by the Chidori, and his forehead was devoid of skin, all that remained was torn, charred muscle, and visible patches of bone. It was safe to say that he was done. Then, Sasuke's gaze fell to his discarded tanto, and then it returned to Niji. Looking down at his fellow genin writhing on the dirt, he couldn't help but lament how things had gotten to this point for him. His story was unfortunate, Sasuke could at least admit that much. However, there were a lot of unfortunate stories in the ninja world, and many of them created monsters no better than Orochimaru, his brother. Niji was granted the opportunity to verbally vent his turmoil for once, and in a cruel twist of fate, that turned out to be his undoing. Again, having someone of a like mind who could potentially understand and empathize to actually talk to went a long way, and Niji clearly never had that, so when offered that opportunity in a roundabout way, it was no surprise that he took it with both hands. Sasuke simply took full advantage of that. As he walked over to the tanto and picked it up, it felt like lead in his hand. The gaze he sent back at Niji was less dispassionate and more pitying. Sasuke knew that he was dealt a raw hand, as were his teammates, and trauma tended to force people down the beaten path toward the void. However, he also knew that he wouldn't have to travel down that path on his own. Niji, clearly, had also traveled the same beaten path toward the void, only he blinked when the void stared back. Staring down at Niji with the tanto in hand, a morbid sense of clarity came over him. This was what being consumed by hatred made a person become. This was what cultivating hatred and loathing, allowing it to fester, transformed a person into. Niji got his recompense for the crimes perpetrated against the branch house, yet he was still empty of everything but his hatred. And that was exactly what Itachi wanted Sasuke to become. Well, fuck that. Itachi wasn't going to dictate Sasuke's life more than he had already. The Uchiha clan would be avenged, and Sasuke would do so on his terms, not Itachi's. It was at that moment that Genma appeared by Sasuke's side and placed a hand on his shoulder. "He's done," Genma sullenly said, appearing to read exactly what Sasuke was thinking. "I think we've had enough bloodshed amongst comrades in these exams." Sasuke didn't reply, only resealing his tanto and turning to leave. The battle was over, both of them. Winner, Sasuke Uchiha. Genma announced, and the crowd fell into applause that soon grew into raucous cheering. Sasuke ignored every decibel and remained wrapped in his thoughts as he meandered toward the tunnel. Meanwhile, Neji was loaded onto a stretcher and carried to the medical ward of the stadium to have his grievous injuries seen. He did not pay attention to Sasuke approaching him with a tanto, nor did he see Genma stop him and declare the match over before he could be put out of his misery. All Neji put together was him being horrifically maimed and the people of Konoha roaring in approval. It seemed that it wasn't just the main house of the Hyuga clan that reveled in the suffering of the branch house. The entirety of Konoha did as well. Any of you guys find anything? One clone of Naruto called out to the others in the library. I got a map of the village with the clan districts listed, another clone excitedly shouted. Awesome. The first clone cheered. Does it say if it's in use or if it's abandoned? The other clone shook his head, but a third clone chimed in with his nose in another book. Says here that the Shodai encouraged the Senju clan to intermingle with the village, so a lot of the clan just ended up marrying into other families rather than sticking with their own. Why would they do that? A fourth clone, this one scanning through a bunch of maps of the clan districts, piped up. Something about fostering the will of fire, the third clone dismissively replied, and the other clone sent back varying degrees of phlegmatic expressions. The first clone grunted, and then he turned to a group of clones that were huddled around a set of books and scrolls in the corner. What about you guys? When they didn't respond, he almost shouted at them to get their attention, but the memory of the librarian's glare at the front desk kept him silent. Instead, he wandered over to them to see what had captured their attention, and a few other clones peered over in curiosity as well. What's up? He asked, approaching the enraptured group. You guys find something? The group of 3 clones looked up from the open book, surrounded by the mess of other texts they collected with pensive expressions, and then one of them slid the book over to the first clone. The Shodai's wife, one of them lowly muttered, piquing the first clone's interest. Said clone's eyes widened into planets when he read the name of the woman in question. Mito Uzumaki. He balked, and the rest of the clones abandoned their stations to gather around the table. Is she related to us? One of the many clones carefully inquired. Oh no, the clone that slid the book shrugged. Just says that she married the Shodai and was originally from a different nation. Political marriage between clans, one of the other clones sitting at the table mumbled, very much unsure about how to process that information. The word clans stuck out in every clone's brain. Obviously, the Senju clan was part of that union, but that also just confirmed the boss's suspicions that there was an Uzumaki clan to go along with the Uzumaki temple. It also confirmed that there was an Uzumaki clan in the village's history, one significant enough to be entwined with one of the founders of the village. So much for the old man always telling the boss that he had no family. Even if he had no living relatives, it at least would have been nice to be let in on any information about his clan's existence. Hell, even a passing hint that there were once people like him would have gone a long way in making him feel less alone. Well, no use crying over spilled milk, the first clone eventually asserted, shaking the rest of the clones out of their collective funk. We have the general location of the Senju compound, and we have a lead on our own clan. One of you dispel and send that info back to boss, and then we'll continue this deep dive to learn whatever else we can about her. Right? The clones said in unison, but they all flinched when a harsh shushing noise came from the librarian at the desk. Right? They shouted instead, and one of the clones vanished in a puff of smoke. Back at the arena, the memories of the clone returned to Naruto right as Sasuke left the field. He blinked as the new information made its way through his brain, and his eyes momentarily widened before an uncharacteristic scowl took shape on his face. He knew the old man had always been lying to him, but now he was unearthing the extent of his deceit. There were so many instances in which the Sandaime looked him in the eye with a downcast expression and told him that he didn't know who his parents were, nor if he had any family to speak of, and that was that. He never once brought up the connection to the Uzumaki clan, nor did he ever bring up anyone named Mito. And yet, the most insulting thing about it all was that all of this information was freely available for Naruto to find at the library. At any point, Naruto could have dug into the village's history and discovered these inconsistencies. Did the Sandaime really think so low of him that he just assumed that Naruto would never think to check the library for readily available information about his potential family? Fair, honestly. He wouldn't have even done it if not for the Kyuubi suggestion. Your Hokage thinks of you as an idiot, and he isn't wrong. The long-suffering sigh slipped out of Naruto's lips in response to his tenant's wonderful contribution to his spiral. Doing his best to ignore the jab, he turned to greet his triumphant teammate as he stepped back into the competitor's booth. That was awesome, Sasuke. Naruto cheered, putting on a bit more excitement than necessary. Sasuke just shrugged, placing his hands in his non-existent pockets. I thought he'd be stronger. Even you could have taken him down. Oh, don't be so modest, Sasuke, Sakura chimed in with a beaming smile. That was a fantastic performance. You showed everyone why you're still the top dog amongst the genin. Careful, Sakura, Naruto playfully chided. Don't want his ego to inflate any more than it already has. My ego could never inflate to the size of your big ass head, Sasuke fired back with a smirk. Sakura stifled a giggle, meanwhile, Naruto's eye twitched and he rolled up his sleeve. How about I smash you with this big ass head? Make it past Gaara first, Sasuke brushed him off, stepping toward the guardrail to get a view of the arena. Then again, Sakura will probably spank you in the next round anyway. BFT, I bet Sakura could give me a way better fight than you ever could, Naruto shot back with a smirk of his own, which only grew at the sight of Sasuke's eye twitching and Sakura triumphantly sticking her tongue out at the both of them. The next set of combatants, Sakura Haruno and Temari of Sunagaker, make your way to the battlefield. Genma announced from the ground below. Temari, miffed at being openly disregarded as an opponent, opened her fan with a huff and hopped onto it, lowering herself to the ground in flashy fashion while sending Sakura a challenging glare. I guess that's my cue, Sakura said, letting loose a brief sigh to free herself of any burgeoning anxiety. Fortunately, Naruto's loving pat on the back did wonders in putting that anxiety to bed. Kick her ass, Sakura. He enthusiastically encouraged. Knock him dead, Sasuke followed up, sending a nod her way. Nodding back with a determined smile, she made her way out of the booth and down the stairs, eventually emerging from the dark corridor to thunderous fanfare. She may not have had a prestigious clan name, but it was clear that the crowd would root for the hometown player over the foreigner. Sasuke's fight had already electrified the crowd beyond belief as it was. Once Sakura and Temari were finally face to face in the center of the arena, Genma cleared his throat. The next bout of the first round. Sakura Haruno vs Temari of Sunagaker. Sakura's suspicions about the crowd's allegiances were confirmed when their names were announced, and it didn't surprise her to see an already disgruntled Temari's expression grow even more sour. Orochimaru wasn't quite sure how to feel. Sasuke's fight impressed him, as the progress he had made in such a short amount of time was nothing to scoff at and only made the prospect of swiping him away from Konoha that much more delicious. However, his interest had peaked when Sasuke willfully activated the cursed seal amid the Hyuga's bluster, but it became a combination of disappointment at it being used as only a momentary boost to force his Tenketsu back open and begrudging intrigue at the startling battle IQ displayed. Using your opponent's mental and emotional turmoil against them in the middle of a battle was a very nice play. That Hyuga boy, though the sheer volume of hatred in his gaze practically screamed future missing nin, and he was certainly skilled enough to be guided into something useful. Perhaps if the boy was still alive and in working order following whatever the Hyuga clan was sure to do to him in the medical bay after his defeat, Orochimaru would send some agents to sway him to his side with the promise of freedom from his accursed clan. He didn't particularly desire Hyuga, but he could be a nice vessel to have in the meantime of prepping Sasuke if nothing else. That duel must have really struck you to be so introspective, Hiruzen chuckled at the Kazekage disguise. While Niji Hyuga is a truly unfortunate case, Sasuke Uchiha is certainly a marvel to bear witness to. Indeed, he is, Orochimaru nodded, maintaining his Rasa impression. I would have preferred to see the Uchiha in action against my youngest son, but I suppose a battle between Jinchuriki and Sons of Kage will suffice. That got the reaction he was hoping for, as Hiruzen's gaze immediately hardened and locked onto him. Rasa let loose a dry chuckle in response. Don't give me that. He blanketed the stadium with its chakra just now. He broadcasted to the world that he was a Jinchuriki. Don't be cute with me, boy, Hiruzen icily warned, and Orochimaru had to fight back a guffaw. I'm not an idiot, Hiruzen, he chided. You'd have to be to not spot the resemblance. I won't tell anyone if that's what you're so concerned with. See that you don't, Hiruzen left it at that, keeping his stony gaze fixed on his fellow Kage. The warning was implicit but very much expressed, and while a decrepit fuck in Orochimaru's esteemed opinion, Hiruzen Sarutobi wasn't the strongest of the 5 Kage for no reason. Well, it wouldn't be that way by day's end. Temari would never admit to being afraid. She was a proud Kunoichi of Sunagaker, one of her village's strongest wind users and best practitioners of Tessenjutsu, and she had grown up with a monster in human form. Make no mistake, she loved her brothers to pieces, but even she would readily admit that she did her best to avoid agitating her twisted, homicidal baby brother, so it was more accurate to say that barring anything involving Gaara and who wasn't afraid of him. Temari would never admit to being afraid. But the girls standing across from her, alongside her team? That fucking team of monsters. They terrified her. Sure, word of the scion of the Uchiha clan had made its rounds, and the idea of him being exceptionally competent for a genin wasn't particularly far-fetched for the clan's reputation. Naruto Uzumaki was a surprise to be certain, but given that he was clearly a similar brand of monster to Gaara, she wasn't an idiot. She could reasonably narrow down what Biju he possessed based on Konoha's recent history and his uncanny resemblance to their late yondaime. Him proving himself to be a considerable threat wasn't too far-fetched either. So what the fuck did that make Sakura Haruno, the run-of-the-mill shinobi with no great expectations? She didn't possess a clan name, at least not one Tamari was at all familiar with, she wasn't the slightest bit threatening during their brief encounter before the exams, and while the way she damn near brutalized her opponent during the preliminaries was entertaining, Tamari didn't see anything that grabbed her attention one way or the other. So, naturally, she was thrown for a nebula of loops when Sakura fucking Haruno unleashed an aura so heavy that it would have planted her and Kankuro to the ground under normal circumstances. It only hadn't because it was competing with her teammate casually flexing his Biju's chakra for all the world to feel just to keep his comrade from storming the field and killing the Hyuga, and even still, they weren't the only presences in the booth. Gaara was there, and he was literally salivating, chomping at the bit to unleash the beast and spill some blood. How in the fuck was Gaara the least threatening person in the room off of sheer chakra presence? Exactly what the hell were they feeding this team? Was Copy Nin Kakashi just that good of a sensei? Was Konoha attempting to groom a new generation of Sannin? If they were doing a really fucking good job of it so far. Obviously, these three would have to die in the invasion, but there was no way in hell Tamari would be able to accomplish that, so she could only hope that Gaara succeeded in killing Naruto Uzumaki in their fight, and he would succeed because Gaara never loses. The only person who could subdue him was their father, right? Meanwhile, Sakura remained outwardly composed, maintaining a determined readiness and idly watching Genma raise his arm to the side of them. Begin. No sooner than Genma sliced the air with his hand did Tamari leap into action, refusing to take any chances with her opponent. "Wind scythe jutsu," she cried, swinging her fan and unleashing a gust of wind that was felt throughout the entire venue. Genma and even much of the crowd had to brace themselves from the colliding wind currents, and at the epicenter of it all was Sakura, doing her best to shield her face with the sleeves of her trench coat as she waited out the momentous scud. Tamari nearly smirked, believing that Sakura was a sitting duck against the wind blades within the gust, which were certain to take her down via death by 1,000 cuts. Nearly being the operative word was important, though, as Sakura weathered the storm and, to Tamari's consternation, came out the other end looking no worse for wear. "Is that it?" Sakura asked, her tone far too genuine for Tamari's comfort. "If that's not enough, you're more than welcome to some more." Tamari shouted back, swinging her fan once more for another wind scythe jutsu, with even more oomph put into it. Another powerful gust blasted through the arena, even carving through the topsoil, as the currents converged onto Sakura once again. And yet again, Sakura merely stood there, bracing herself with her arms and weathering the storm without moving an inch. The only difference this time around was the presence of shallow cuts in her trench coat, but Sakura herself was pretty much untouched. "What the fuck?" Tamari internally barked, unable to keep the frustrated befuddlement from showing in her expression. "Is she redirecting all the currents? No, that would require a level of mastery over wind that even I don't have yet. She must be tanking the attacks, which explains the cuts in her coat, but what the hell is that thing even made of if it's handling wind blades this easily?" It was only the sudden scraping of the dirt that alerted Tamari to defend, as Sakura appeared before her in the blink of an eye with a haymaker that would have slammed into her jaw had she not brought her fan up to block the hit. The loud clang that reverberated through the arena upon impact didn't make her feel any safer. "Eye on the ball." Sakura chided with a teasing smirk, throwing another punch that was deftly avoided, but refusing to relinquish her advantage. Sakura continued her sudden assault, relentlessly attacking Tamari and giving her little to no room to strike back. Tamari was left blocking and deflecting the Taijutsu barrage with her fan, the resulting clangs of which were reminiscent of slamming stone onto bronze, or simply dodging the hits that made it past her impromptu shield. The one opportunity for a counterstrike that she was able to capitalize on only amounted to her swinging her fan like a club, which Sakura avoided by bending with unnerving flexibility and followed up by sweeping Tamari's legs, bringing her to the ground. The fact that it felt like she was chop-blocked by a tree was the last straw for Tamari, and she sprang up in an instant before leaping away to create some much-needed space. Only then did she finally notice some abnormalities in her opponent. For one, Sakura's legs were unnaturally brown from the calf down, meanwhile the small glimpses of her arms poking out of her sleeves indicated that they were the same color, her fists were, at least, contrasting the rest of her pale skin. The quick mental scan of all the earth jutsu she was aware of given Suna's tumultuous history with Iwa led her to settle on a partial use of the earth spear jutsu at play. Clever, pink-haired bitch. This was already proving to be troublesome, and the match had only just begun. Taijutsu wasn't Tamari's strong suit, and so long as Sakura was pushing earth chakra through her limbs to empower her strikes, whatever advantage Sakura already had in that department was increased tenfold. Tamari couldn't let her land a hit lest she risk a broken everything. She needed to keep her at a distance. Popping open her battle fan once more, Tamari poured twice as much chakra into her next attack. Wind style. Cyclone side. As promised, a far more violent spat of wind currents jettisoned from the fan, carving actual trenches through the terrain and sucking up anything and everything into the vacuum pockets that were cleaving a path toward Sakura. The crowd was in awe at the power on display, having already been invested in Sakura's seemingly inhuman punching power, and it looked to them as though Temari had finally managed to even the odds. So, naturally, Sakura narrowed her gaze and quickly ran through a seal sequence that got an audible cheer from the Uchiha viewing party in the pure world. Without a word, she spat a giant orb of fire at the approaching wind jutsu, and the collision that followed resulted in a brilliant blaze of glory that illuminated half of the battlefield. The crowd's awes had become an excited ovation, and even Sasuke sent a nod of approval to the clever use of his clan's jutsu. He at least now knew he didn't regret teaching her the fireball jutsu to get a basis for how to properly mold the chakra for the jutsu Anko gave her. Temari, meanwhile, was feeling her frustration return in full measure, but she kept her focus on getting away from the bright flash of flames that was more luminous than concussive. However, a problem quickly presented itself once she created yet more space. Sakura was nowhere to be found. The flames had died down, as had the wind, and there was nothing on the battlefield that would give her any places to hide, considering Temari kept the trees behind her at all times. So, if she wasn't in front of nor above her, nor could she have scampered around her that quickly to hide in the trees that only left. Her instincts yoinked her into the sky like a marionette mere milliseconds before Sakura's arms burst from underground and grabbed air instead of Temari's ankles. The rest of her upper body popped out next, and she shot an annoyed glare at Temari gliding in the air up above. Not wasting any time, she fully unearthed herself and unsealed 2 scrolls from her trench coat, unraveling both at once and slamming them to the ground. Within moments, 2 torrents of water poured into the arena, quickly creating a massive pond around her that she hastily took advantage of by performing 3 seals and then cannonballing into the water. Water style. Ripping torrent. Sakura shouted, surprising Temari as well as the crowd when the splashing water began cycling around her like a makeshift water spout. While Sakura's chakra control was excellent, it wasn't so perfect, nor did she yet have the volume to cast this jutsu in the palm of her hand like it traditionally would have been. As a result, she utilized her fine control to her advantage by wielding her entire body as a focal point for the water to coil around, generating an aquatic cyclone of sorts that progressively surged into the sky. Her teammates, Sensei and Anko were on their feet and cheering her on every step of the way, and the crowd wasn't far behind, loudly enthralled with the stops she was pulling out in this battle.